Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this would have been myself and Councillor Howell together, but hopefully I think I can sort of, answer any questions that come up on it. The capital investment strategy, brackets non-treasury, which is quite an important couple of words, for 2020 to 2025. The BCP capital investment strategy was approved by the Shadow for 2019 to 22, was approved by the Shadow Authority Executive Committee last February prior to the creation of BCP Council. This revised strategy has been updated to reflect the new corporate strategy and the investment ambition of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. The strategy sets out the basis by which the Council wishes to assemble and hold a portfolio of investment assets that reflect its values and priorities for a number of reasons: to promote the financial health of the organisation by generating a target return across the portfolio, to make a positive contribution to the current or future delivery of services in terms of scope, quality or cost, and the key ones for me are to contribute towards a sustainable environment, to deliver socio-economic benefits to the town, and to create dynamic places through strategic regeneration or redevelopment opportunities. So the investment portfolio has been realigned to consist of only the key assets acquired or held solely for investment purposes, and includes the legacy Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch assets, and it's appropriate to provide an updated financial projection. So in the appendices here, you've got a financial appraisal attached in Appendix B particularly, which focuses on the current position in relation to two of the largest multi-tenanted investments within the portfolio, so the Mallard Road Retail Park and the Wessex Trade Centre. The company have been asked to approve this capital investment strategy. So we do currently have a capital investment strategy, but the key for me of this one is that we're updating that capital investment strategy. We're bringing together the legacy Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole assets all within one place so that we can actually sort of assess them and monitor them all within one set. And the key thing is to align with our new corporate strategy, particularly around the sustainable environment, socio-economic benefits and dynamic places, as I've mentioned. So that's the key change in this strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Members. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I've got quite a few points actually that I'd like to raise. The first one is relative to paragraph 2.3.3, where it talks about the strategy. Alternatively, the Council may acquire high-risk, high-reward investments, provided that the blended risk across the whole portfolio is considered prudent. I'd like to suggest to you that the Council should not be investing in high-risk investments. This is public money. It's not to be gambled, which effectively what some high-risk investments can be. I personally would like to see that removed. So I don't know if you'd like to comment on that before I move on. Thank you.
I think it's a good point. I think we do need to make sure that our portfolio is diversified. It's not currently particularly diversified, but it is diversified across a range of sort of stable, day-to-day investments, and then maybe sort of high reward investments. I think if we were going to look at that sort of alternative, then there always has to be a business case when these investments are appraised. There has to be due diligence. Obviously, the Section 151 officers involved. In some ways, I probably wouldn't like to take it out so that we don't sort of restrict ourselves. So the option is still there, but obviously, I think there would be a lot of due diligence if we were going to look at something which is a high risk investment in time.
Thank you. Can I carry on? In Appendix 1, sorry, I'll go to. Oh yes, it's Appendix 1, page 76. We'll talk about sector analysis as a percentage of the portfolio, and also the financial value as a percentage of the portfolio. And that's an explanation that until you get to a state where you've got a mature portfolio, you can't actually see how that balance is achieved. The problem is, without actually understanding what the total investment for a portfolio is likely to be, you can't actually put a percentage on it. So it's like a living thing that never fulfills itself in terms of the rules that you're applying. For example, the Mallard Road, for example, was an investment of I don't know, £49 million or something, and it remains 3 years on as 50% of the portfolio in terms of its value. Yet, there's a constraint of, I think, only 20%, or it should be 20% on the value of the overall portfolio value. So, unless you actually define what the final position is going to be, you can't apportion these values or percentages to a particular investment.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I agree to an extent that this is the difficult thing, isn't it, where we've inherited a number of historic investments, or even recent investments by the preceding authorities, but even just historic asset holdings by, for example, the Dolphin Centre that Poole Council's held for historic reasons for many years. And that is the beauty of actually bringing it all together within one strategy. So we can now really start to sort of understand, well, what capital investments have we got to generate it within our portfolio to generate income. And yeah, so you look at that and you think, actually, is it balanced? Is it diversified? Where would we need to add? Where would we need to even take away? So it's a work in progress, and I think the beauty of this is that actually we can now start to see and understand what we've got. But I agree that at the moment there are certain sort of investments which actually sort of twist the emphasis of the investments.
Have you got many more questions, Councillor Bartlett? Okay, all right.
Yeah, what I would say to that is that before we can do it, we need to actually establish what those investment limits are, and then you can actually see what the percentages within that portfolio are. On Appendix 2, we're talking about performance to achieve a net return on assets of 1.5%, and also with an income yield of 1.5%. Net of costs. So surely, for any investment with the sort of risk that you might be, 1.5% is much too low a figure to set out. You need something much more significant than that. Otherwise, it's just basically not worth taking the risk.
Yes, I suppose a couple of observations there. As Councillor Brown said, all investments are scrutinised by the Section 151 officer, and the Section 151 officer is content with this strategy, which is quite a low risk strategy. So it's difficult sometimes to set investment potential. So you want to get higher returns of 5, 7, 10%. It then starts taking down perhaps more riskier investments. So it's just trying to find that right balance. And I think the whole point of having this strategy is that it can be reviewed periodically. If we're not performing, we can, or we're not performing at the right levels, we can review it.
More then.
Yes, and then I'll move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, just on Mallard Road, and I was interested to sort of learn the figures and understand more about the sort of Mallard Road investment. It's not making a loss. Just to clarify those figures in Appendix B, it has got a £229,000 deficit comparing the actual performance with the business plan performance. So the business plan was 1.8 million surplus. It's actually delivered just short of 1.6 million surplus. So there's a deficit in terms of what it's returned, but it has actually returned a 1.6 million surplus in the actual performance.
Okay, thanks. I understand that now. Sorry, that was my misinterpretation of that figure. So it's not making a loss. Yeah. But of course, it has devalued. Its capital asset value is still depreciated by over £2 million. So you take one against the other, and you're still actually making a loss.
I think you're right, and that's where I was interested to see these numbers as well. That obviously it's got an initial purchase price of 49 million, and it's a loss of around 2.2 million on that down to 46.9 million, the value in the accounts as at the end of March last year. So that was last year. I mean, it is a long-term investment in terms of a property investment. Part of the reasoning for that is that the original purchase cost also include things like stamp duty, land tax, and initial fees and costs were within that, which obviously aren't really sort of part of the asset value. But yeah, I don't think it's interesting, isn't it, to look at that when you compare that with others such as the Wessex Trade Centre in Poole. You know, it was a £10 million initial purchase cost, and it's actually appreciated in value by nearly £1 million up to £10.9 million now. So yeah, I think it's interesting to note the differences in different performances in the investments.
Very quickly, because I have got quite a few speakers now.
Thank you. Just one final one then. Those figures, do they include the additional investment that was put into to Mallard Road in order to make it useful for a new customer, a new letter?
If that's the recent one, I don't think they do at the moment, because that's the actual value is as at March 2019, so that will obviously be updated. But yeah, there is an additional recent investment to enhance one of the units for Pure Gym to become a tenant.
Okay, I will move on to the next speaker, Councillor Mellor.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett did talk about a couple of points I was going to raise. I think they're relevant to re-point out that the high risk point and also the low return point. It's completely possible to make strong returns and scale of returns without taking any risk. And I think there's risk in terms of high risk, but also by not having enough return. So, and what that comes to when I look at it is scale. You know, making good, solid, strategic investments, but sometimes you have to do them at scale to get a return. So there are points around ambitious, and how ambitious is this is what's in front of us. There's I think Bill Cotton said it was a low risk. I understand that. I might argue it's actually more low ambition really. Couple of questions I've got about it is so why geographically we're talking about just investing here. That's a decision lots of councils are weighing up at the moment. I absolutely understand by saying here is a better place for us to invest our money. I wouldn't necessarily agree that just here. So if you could comment on that, please. I like the triple bottom line. I think that's a strong build and step forward. Could you just then you mentioned the Wessex Trade Centre? Can you talk about how if that came up again, how you would triple bottom line that? I.e., what's the environmental benefit or impact of a Wessex Trade Centre that we did in Poole? And also, just to sort of cut off some of the questions somewhere. On 2.2.1, we talk about residential only relating to statutory functions. So can you just clarify for me, please, David? Are you saying we wouldn't be buying any residential property under this strategy purely as an investment? It would have to be relating to the statutory functions, not just the economic ones. So I believe there are 3 questions in that. Thank you.
Right, I'll try and cover all of those. I'm sure you'll let me know if I don't quite cover all of them. Just in terms of the point about investing within Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, yeah, I mean, a lot of authorities have looked at whether to invest within their own authority boundaries or much more widely, just neighbouring authorities or even nationally. And some have gone very aggressively to sort of investment right across the UK. I think it's a conscious decision. Actually, we do want to invest in our local area where it's not just a purely commercial investment for returns. Actually, that we can actually get additional value from it in terms of socio-economic value, sustainable environmental investments. But it may be that I can't find the paragraph at the moment, but there is a paragraph there that talks about. By exception, we would look at outside of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole if it was going to deliver particular benefits.
But that then relates just to wind farms, or some sort of
farms or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So we were basically saying in that how I read that, and I completely understand what you're saying. It's a choice, but if that was effectively for we're not going to have. Hopefully, we're not going to have many wind farms, etc. We're going to be investing in the BCP area. Yeah,
I think we're going to look at potentially outside the geographic area for those exceptions for sustainable and carbon offsetting initiatives. But I think yeah, it's we have a certain level of investment we want to make, and I think there's plenty of opportunities within Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole that we don't need to be going looking nationally and investing right out of the area. Actually, there are plenty of investment opportunities on our doorstep to be able to do that drive more than just the pure financial benefits from it, that drive more the wider socio-economic benefits. Just in terms of the Wessex Trade Centre and the point you made there about the sort of triple consideration. It's an interesting question about how we would retrospectively sort of view that in terms of the delivery. I mean, primarily it is a financial investment for a financial return. But I think this is going forward where we're looking at, the investment panel gets together and looks at opportunities. We'll really be looking at those socio-economic opportunities and environmental opportunities besides the financial opportunities.
Thinking about the jobs and so on.
Yeah, so supporting regeneration, supporting jobs, etc.
I think there was one more question, which was to do with residential.
Thank you.
That was 2.1.4, wasn't it? Oh, sorry, 2.2.1. That's right. Circled. Okay. Yeah, private rented sector. Yeah, I don't know whether it's about the residential investments.
Shall I ask it again, David?
Yeah.
Just to be clear. Yes. So effectively, I believe we're saying there that we'll only be looking at residential investments if it relates to a statutory function. And I just wanted to question or just clarify: are you saying we will not be acquiring residential properties purely for economic? Will only be acquiring them if it fits into supporting our statutory function.
Yeah, I think yes, they will have to generate financial return. Yes, we've got within the portfolio already sort of student accommodation and private rented sector accommodation within there. I think we are much more interested in. We have a massive housing issue in the area, and we have a massive need to invest in our housing stock in all sorts of ways. And I think we are much more interested in really focusing our investment where it is going to support our housing function.
I'll just come back then
Yes.
briefly, which I understand, and it's a choice, and that's fine, and I support a lot of the stuff that's in this paper. My comment to you would be, I believe we're limiting the potential by talking about just in the area. We're then saying about the triple bottom line. You've just kind of said that even though the Wessex Trade Centre was a hugely positive investment, neither of you could come up with an environmental benefit for that. So that doesn't pass the triple bottom line test. So you're limiting the potential by area. Then you're limiting it again by the triple bottom line. I just think we've already said it's not a very ambitious paper. So I just believe we're potentially box ourselves into a corner. And I know, David, we talked about this before. You in Poole have talked about the success of Eastleigh and how they've, done a lot of things. So I'm just slightly surprised to see the lack of ambition in this. I understand it has to be safe. I get that. I understand what you're trying to do about, having more than a fiscal benefit to that. I think you're boxing yourself into a corner. But thank you for your answers.
Just to add to that, I accept your point. I see your point that we may be limiting ourselves in terms of what investment we're looking at. I suppose I would describe it as actually we're focusing our investment where it will have the maximum impact for the people that live in the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole conurbation.
We've got surplus, we've got pressures in adult social care and children, so you could argue the fact that the best way to do that is to have a more ambitious strategy, to be making much more money, to be putting millions of pounds back into this, and you're not doing that because you want to do your triple bottom line, and that's what your coalition of compromise has to do, and I understand that. I'm just saying that, I think there's an opportunity to serve the residents of BCP better by being bolder and brighter, because you don't have to be high risk, which you're saying you're going to do. You don't have to be low return, which you're saying you're going to do. You can actually have scale and have ambition and deliver better for people on that basis. We probably won't agree, but I genuinely do appreciate your answers.
Okay, I will move on. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I was also going to ask about the investments outside the geographical area because, like Councillor Miller, I was concerned that we are restricting ourselves to not necessarily investing in the best opportunities because they're not within the council area. But as I think you have quite exhaustively had this conversation with Councillor Drew Miller, I don't necessarily need an answer.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Farquhar?
Thank you very much, Chair. That's a new one on me, a coalition of compromise. Not come across that before. What I find interesting here, or what I will ask you a question this time instead of rambling on, if you don't mind. On page 61, paragraph 31, the Council has signed up to a climate change emergency. As such, it is critical that decision makers consider sustainability and environmental impact of their decision. An environmental impact assessment will be completed for each investment proposal and reported on a case-by-case basis. Now, obviously, with more and more organisations divesting away from perhaps what would be viewed by many as morally unsound investment opportunities, talk us through it. How's that working? What are we copying? What's the model that we're doing? How do we actually assess that something is actually morally sound and actually has a negative or positive impact on the environmental and ecological emergency? And as a follow-on, perhaps to the discussion, is there not an opportunity then to invest in startups, renewables, and a variety of other organisations? Because that's pretty much the only thing which I would fit, to my mind, that criteria in that paragraph 31.
I think that's a really interesting point, and actually I think it will challenge us to look at investments which come forward, which are either brought to us or which we become aware of, and to look at that sustainable angle and to look at the environmental impact of those opportunities, because I think some in the past it's difficult to come up with what sustainable environmental aspect is there to it. And I think it probably will challenge us, and it will probably challenge officers to actually sort of think that through, and I think that's a really important part of our strategy. I sit on the Dorset County Pension Fund, and last Thursday we had another meeting and we spent probably an hour and a half. We had Extinction Rebellion attended and they posed a number of questions, and our investment advisors spent some time talking about climate change, talking about corporate social responsibility, talking about responsible investment. And it was very much around, you could divest from all these investments which you think aren't environmentally friendly, but actually sometimes it's more important to actually work with those organisations and actually be actively involved with them to sort of ensure that they become more sustainable. And I think it's an area not just in property investment but in all sorts of investment areas that's becoming incredibly high profile, that the investment industry is having to shift its thinking from a purely financial outcomes to all sorts of other sort of areas of responsibility, whether it be social responsibility or whether it be environmental sustainability, to assess the sort of the impact that they're having. And I think that it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. So as things come before us to consider, I think it's going to be really interesting to see the answers we get to those questions on each investment. But it's difficult to say at this moment, not knowing what opportunities will be presented. But I think to sort of challenge those sorts of proposals to make sure we get the most bang for our buck in terms of actually driving more sort of responsible investment.
Yes.
So essentially what I'm hearing from you, that this is a challenge to our officers to change the mindset on investment strategy. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's fair, actually. Yeah. I think it is to sort of say, we don't, we're interested in what investment opportunities come before us, and some of them might be a very good financial deal, and may stand up on that basis. But I think we really need to sort of to state and restate that this is what we're about, this is what we value. Where's the socio-economic value? Where's the value for the residents of Bournemouth, Christchurch, and Poole? Where's the environmental sustainable angle on this? What can we push this investment? If we make this investment, can we do something with it that actually improves sustainability, that actually delivers social value? And that's what I'm more interested in, is actually not just about profit, but actually about social value.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that answers my coalition of compromise question and query.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Yes, one of my questions has already been answered on the restriction around the conurbation and to exactly what that meant. So I'll leave that. But I've just got a slight concern, and for clarification, each of these investments creates an asset for the council. Asset management clearly is very important on these issues, and that includes things like rent reviews and re-gearing of leases. Is that referred to elsewhere in our strategy papers or policy papers, because it's not referred to at all in this document? And should we not be making reference to annual rent reviews or whatever, and certainly annual visits, so that the assets can be checked upon for their well-being and so on? So apparently there is nothing in this document about that, and should there be?
You go.
Yes, if I can kick off on that one. Yeah, thank you. It's a very good observation. So that is handled in a different document, a different strategy, and that's about managing our capital assets. So that goes into detail about how we actually manage all our assets, both our operational and our investment assets. So again, rent reviews, maintenance, etc., etc. So that's covered there.
Let me just come back. Would it
Yes.
not therefore at least be an idea to cross-reference those within the document?
Thank you. If that becomes a recommendation, I'm sure we can take that on.
Okay, thank you. Any more members wish to speak on this? No? Okay, right. So I think at the very start, Councillor Bartlett had kicked off, and he made the observation that in the document... Sorry, have I missed something? Right. He mentioned that we shouldn't really be embarking on high-risk investments, high-risk, high-return, because it is public money that we are using. So I put it to the board whether you wish to remove that or whether you're content for it to remain on the basis that each investment will be on a case-by-case basis. And then I think the other point really is that it would have liked to have seen a strategy that had more scale and more ambition. But also I think this raises the interesting point about the sustainability and the socio-economic benefits versus the return. So which is the priority in your business case, whether your socio-economic factors rank higher than the return that you get. I think that raises an interesting point as to this, by the nature of the document, actually says it's an investment strategy. So when you do an investment, the simple way I look at it is that you look to get a return, not to do it because it is the thing to do. So that's an interesting point. And then obviously I think the point that Councillor Brooke raised, which is that the properties that we own, in terms of maintenance, rent review, re-gearing of leases potentially, perhaps, I don't know, we could put a recommendation to say that it is not actually contained within this document, and just a footnote to say, actually refer you to document X, because I agree that it shouldn't be part of this document, that it should be part of a separate asset maintenance document. Councillor Brown.
It's in the actual strategy document section. Paragraph 4, but it's section 3, links to other existing strategies, and it details there the corporate property strategy and plan, the MTFP, and it does state that it has links with the emerging corporate asset management strategy, etc., which is where those are covered off. So it is referenced within the strategy document.
Thank you for that. So I think on that basis, you content, Councillor Brooke, that we don't need to
I am.
do anything further.
I was just making reference to section 272 in the document, which lists a whole series of management processes within the portfolio, and they were missing from that.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think just one other point from myself is, and famous last words, now I can't find it, it's in Appendix 1 where we had the current investments that we hold and what percentage of the portfolio it actually covers. Here we go, I found it. And it said that we didn't really want to have any more than 25% invested in a particular sector. But obviously, because of the way we have it, it's quite heavily balanced towards retail. And perhaps it's not something within this document because this is just a strategy. It would just be interesting to see going forward, perhaps in a year, what actions have been taken to rebalance the mix within the portfolio so that it is more evenly spread. So that's just a point from myself. So members, are you content to just have comments on this item to Cabinet, or would you like any specific recommendation vis-a-vis the one that Councillor Bartlett raised about high risk? Yes, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I mean, the risk issue is also probably, and it probably answers Councillor Mellor's point as well, because there's part of the same paragraph that actually says it may acquire or develop assets that deliver lower financial returns or even make a loss if the overall benefits of the individual investments, including the socio-economic factors, justify this approach. So what we're saying here is you've got a complete range from one actually doing it deliberately, even though you're going to make a loss, to the other extreme is you can take it as risky as you like, provided it's got a good return. So it's basically do anything you like, provided it's dealt with on a case-by-case. I'm not personally happy with that because I think it's public money and it needs a much more constrained approach because it's public money. So that's my view on it.
Councillor Bartlett, sorry, can you tell me which paragraph it is? I'm struggling to find it on here.
It's on page 70. Para 2.3.3.
2.3.3. Okay, thank you. Right, members, in view of that, I've just noticed that a couple of other people have said that they're not happy with it. What would you like to do in terms of a recommendation on paragraph 2.3.3? Councillor Anderson.
Well, I was going to suggest, Chairman, that we also included about the geographical, making some comment that we should not restrict ourselves to geographical areas and an exception, but as we go for a recommendation, I'd like that we added that as well. But quite frankly, I think we're almost getting close to ultra vires on this paragraph by saying that we want to support properties that make a loss. So I would suggest that we recommend that we strike the entire paragraph.
Members, do we want to strike the entire paragraph, or do we want it reworded so that investments actually yield a return? Views on that?
Yeah.
Or would you rather that paragraph be scrapped?
It should be included to give a return. It is public money, as Councillor Bartlett has said. Yeah. If you're going to invest, you need the money back. The reason for investing is to generate money for the council to provide the services, etc., that we all support. So if it's going to invest, it has to be a return on it.
So if we were to put a recommendation to say we will remove the phrase in the third line of paragraph 2.3.3 to say, or even make a loss, we strike that. If it strike that, it says if overall benefits of individual investments include social economic factors justify this approach. Yes? Board members?
I would like to suggest that we remove everything after the balanced approach and replace that with only purchase properties that return a profit, or words to that effect.
I'm taking the...
My view on it would just leave the first sentence in there. Take a balanced portfolio approach.
Okay.
That then
right,
leaves it open. It doesn't stop you doing anything. Really.
Okay. Right. So there's a proposal on the table. Councillor Brown.
Just one comment and reflection on that, and I'm happy, whatever you want to recommend. Just to say that yes, it is public money, and we're quite aware of that. But all of these proposals and investments would require a business case, which would be looked at in detail. Would be looked at by the Section 151 officer. There would be due diligence, and that, I think, in terms of the use of public money is what we need to make sure that we do. It's not going to be something done on a whim. We are aware of the responsibility we have for the use of public money, and that would be covered by the due diligence.
Yes, I think if we didn't do any due diligence, then that would be really remiss of the council. So members, okay, so are we saying that we want to strike everything from paragraph 2.3.3 other than the first line?
Yes.
We got a proposer?
Yep.
Seconder? Okay. So we've got Councillor Bartlett proposing, Councillor Mellor seconding. Councillor Farquhar, you wish to comment?
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm somewhat alarmed simply reading through it. I don't necessarily understand the gist of this, because essentially I don't think that the council should limit itself from making a morally just decision. And agreed, it is public money, but if it's for properties that are for the public good and those which are vulnerable in our society, then it might actually well be that it should be an investment that the council makes. I don't understand the part where it says alternatively the council may acquire high risk and high reward, because essentially from my understanding of this discussion, it was the high risk and high reward gambling with public money which was of concern here. And I don't agree that we should be striking out the entire paragraph for the sake of just defining what the paper or the officers which wrote it mean by alternatively. Is it alternatively to actually buying a property which is not going to return a profit? Because I don't think profit should be, the driving factor for socio-economic purposes. What is meant to be defined by alternatively in the same paragraph? I do not understand. Because I myself personally think it's only the high risk, high reward that should be lost based upon our debate. But I'd like the portfolio holder or the officer to sort of respond to that.
Do we do have a response for that? Because we are at the point where we are actually ready to go to the vote on the recommendation. So, Councillor Brown, would you like to comment? Mr. Cotton?
Personal.
I think what that paragraph's trying to get at is there's going to be a range of opportunities to consider. There may be ones which deliver lower financial returns, but for example, they may offer regeneration opportunities which we can unlock as an authority by making those investments. So there may be benefits outside of that. And there's a whole range of opportunities in terms of sort of land and property that will have different, on a case-by-case basis, will have different sort of profiles. And I think the important thing is we're not just looking at this as money we've got to invest, this is the target return. So that's all we're interested in. Actually, we're interested in a much more sort of mix of return beyond just the financial return. So I think that's where we need to sort of have that width to consider whether it's a sort of low risk, sort of lower reward, or high risk, high reward.
Okay, thank you. I think Chief Executive, and then I will go to the vote on the recommendation.
I think it's just thank you, Charles. Just looking at the wording, and I think it's the word alternatively that sort of stands out, because what the paragraph actually says is we'll always take a balanced portfolio approach. That means we might do these things if the overall benefits are right, and such acquisition will be subject to having enough money. Alternatively, we might go over here and gamble. Yeah. And I think it's the alternatively. But if you just took out alternatively, you say within this portfolio, the council may acquire high risk, high reward, and that's the question: is whether the business case would support that or not. I think it's the alternatively that really sticks out to me and makes the paragraph quite clumsy. Just thought it was worth putting out because you might come up with a compromise that worked without that.
Yes, Councillor Bartlett, you propose this.
Yeah, no, I think that if you leave it as a balanced portfolio approach, that's like, because it's not constraining anything in that respect. But by setting those concepts, it's actually saying, yeah, this is allowable. Actually, it may not be I think if it's a balanced portfolio, then every decision is taken on its own merits at the time. But you're almost suggesting, by including it here, that this is okay. Actually, I don't think it is, but all decisions will go through a decision-making process at the time. So I think just leaving the first sentence is okay.
Right. Okay. So, members, so that is the original proposal, which has been duly seconded. So I'll just put it to the board. All those who are in favour of putting that recommendation forward to Cabinet, please indicate.
3, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 in favour.
All those against?
1, 1.
Abstentions?
Oh, 3 abstentions. Yes.
Okay, so I think on that basis the recommendation is carried and that will be put forward to Cabinet on Wednesday. Right, so that is the end of item 7. Thank you very much, Councillor Brown and Mr. Cotton. We are now back to the original. Item 8. Can I invite, yes, Councillor Allison and Mr. Williams? Yes. So, developing harmonised approach to tackling street-based antisocial behaviour. Over to you, Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is following me speaking at full council last year, and it shows the council's approach to how we're going to tackle street-based antisocial behaviour. So a review has been undertaken to ensure that the council can adopt a standard means of tackling antisocial behaviour and to seek reduction of the harmful behaviours which impact on the wider society. Ensuring that people visiting, living and working in the town centres feel safe and that street-based antisocial behaviour is addressed robustly is a priority for the council. The previous councils had different approaches to tackling antisocial behaviour, and through this review and introduction of the CSAS team in Poole, we aim to have a consistent approach. This paper was sort of set out in 2 parts. So the first part is harmonising our approach to dealing with antisocial behaviour. So that is adding an additional 3 CSAS officers into Poole and an additional 1 into Bournemouth. And the second part is the review of our PSPO in Poole and sets out for the Director of Communities to go out and consult on that public space protection order. Given the current situation that we've got at the moment, I find it very unlikely that that consultation will begin as it was due to begin in the paper that's out in front of you. Just so you're aware. I'm happy to answer any questions or anything in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Lawton.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions, but the first question on the PSPO. I note on 31 that there's a potential judicial review, but that is now being mellowed, if you like, for want of a better word. Can you just expand a bit on that? Why have we withdrawn, or we've watered it down?
It's not being withdrawn or watered down as a result of the High Court order that's come through. So the review that's happening here is as a result of our desire to have one approach for tackling antisocial behaviour across the conurbation. So it would be unfair to leave those parts of the PSPO in place that are not in place in Bournemouth or in Christchurch. It's not as a result of that High Court order that we've gone for this review. It would have been reviewed anyway. This is about making sure that we are dealing with everybody in the same way and consistently across the conurbation.
From that answer, are you abandoning PSPOs?
We're not abandoning PSPOs, so the PSPO will be consulted on and that will obviously come back to ONS and Cabinet. So I'll wait until we've seen what the results of that consultation is before I comment. In terms of PSPOs as a measure on the whole, we're not getting rid of them at all. I mean, we have PSPOs in Bournemouth and Christchurch that deal with alcohol and other certain things. So PSPOs will very much continue to be a tool that's used by officers in the council.
Yes, certainly.
So in general terms, I think I'm in favour of what you're doing, because obviously I would be, because I introduced CSAS officers into Boscombe, and I note within your paper at page 4, or at item 4, that this proved successful in Boscombe. one of the great successes of it in Boscombe is it's removed antisocial behaviour, begging, and rough sleepers. Now, as Bournemouth has now been accused of being the 4th worst in the country for rough sleepers, I would say again, as I said at last council, I understand and welcome the increase of officers for Poole and for Bournemouth, but again, I would recommend or suggest to you that we need more than is actually put within this paper, i.e. at least another one for Poole and another one for Bournemouth, because the way in which I would envisage it, and perhaps you may share that synopsis, is that as well as those 2 town centres, we do have a 3rd town centre. Although there's not a major problem in Christchurch, it's still there, and we do have areas like Westbourne in Bournemouth or Charminster, or where I live in Southbourne, where there are issues which we need to expand. And if we just only got 2 in Bournemouth and 1 issuing tickets for litter, they're going to be a bit thin on the ground. So can I suggest to you politely that you increase the number, as we said at last council, which not you necessarily yourself, was voted down, because I believe that there is an issue which we need to tackle urgently within the conurbation.
Yeah, so I do tend to agree with what you're saying. I think ideally, as many officers to deal with this issue, the better. In terms of having this, we will have an additional 3 in Poole. We'll have the additional 1. That'll bring both main bigger town centres up to 3 CSAT officers. I think we will definitely consider and see how that impacts. We'll see whether that continues to follow the trend of decreasing incidents. I imagine it will. And I'd be happy to review in the future and continue to add officers if it was felt that they were needed. The exact same thing goes for Christchurch. If we felt that there was certain instance or something changed and that the antisocial behaviour in Christchurch had got to a certain level where we deemed it would warrant this extra officer, then we would certainly be willing to look at that.
Councillor Farquhar?
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got 2 questions and possibly a recommendation. So if I start with the questions initially, can you just confirm if these CSAS officers are actually body camera enabled?
Yes, they are.
And that will continue for all future hires?
Yes, to my knowledge. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I noticed in the paper that in point 25 we refer to the clauses B and E being removed and clauses A, F and G remaining. So to Councillor Lawton's point that I don't think it's been abandoned, but it might be useful to the board to refresh us on what clauses B and E are that have been proposed to be removed and which clauses A, F and G are remaining. Do you have that information to hand?
So, do you want me to separate them?
Council my last.
Have you got them?
Paragraph 7. Thank you very much. So, just give us a little bit of background as regards why those 2 proposals, 2 clauses B and E are.
So it's 4. So it's the 4 in between B and E. So it's B, C, D, and E that are the ones that are being reviewed. So the reason that they're being reviewed is because we believe that these, either are not providing anything additional, or we're considering whether or not they form something that's going to be useful for the officers to use in the future. So my opinion is that those 4 that are in between B and E don't really provide the officers with any additional abilities or authorities in terms of what we've actually seen. So you'll see in the report that there was only actually 2 interventions where the PSPO power was being used. So they're not the power of that PSPO has not really been needed in Poole.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Have you got another question?
I have a recommendation which might actually suit the board to consider. Because we're not a bottomless pit to hire officers left, right and centre, my understanding of the CSAS scheme is that they work very much within a zonal area based upon the evidence that there is a problem in that particular area. My recommendation would be that with the hire of new CSAS officers is that evidence-based requirement is actually applied to other areas, so other areas can request, perhaps on a temporary basis, that their zone, whether it be Christchurch, as Councillor Lawton said, is considered for maybe a temporary operation of CSAS officers. I do understand that CSAS officers are actually briefed as part of police briefing, so it might have some temporary issues, but thinking for the public good and the nature of people are concerned about their particular area for aggressive begging, etc. The presence of a CSAS officer, even if it was for 2-3 months, might actually address the fact that if you move them on from Poole, they might move to one of the further out wards, so you may have to chase your tail and have a request coming in for a CSAS. So essentially the recommendation is that we are very, very agile in where CSAS officers can be deployed based upon evidence that they're actually required to have a presence there for a period of time.
Yeah, so you're correct that the CSAS officers are given a specific jurisdiction, so that we've got the 2 in the Boscombe, that now will be 3 in Poole and 3 in Bournemouth. In terms of the actual logistics of moving, I'm not too sure, so I'll defer to Mr. Williams.
Hello, Council. So the areas in which CSAS officers can operate is designated by the Chief Constable based on that evidence of antisocial behaviour. So we can only move them into new areas which the Chief Constable has agreed that they can operate in. So at the moment that's Boscombe, Bournemouth Town Centre and Poole Town Centre. If there was evidence of other areas needing CSAS officers, then we'd have to work with Dorset Police and the Chief Constable to get those areas designated. As the report states at paragraph 23, there is a discussion taking place with the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office around a wider CSAS strategy and what that looks like. But we are slightly constrained by the fact that the areas in which they operate need to be agreed by the Chief Constable.
Thank you, Chair. I withdraw my recommendation.
I was going to suggest that, but you did it. Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. I am broadly in agreement with this paper. I think just one minor snag. We have another consultation. As Councillor Lawton mentioned earlier, we are the 4th worst in the country at the moment, and it's really just emphasising to yourself as Cabinet Member and to the wider Cabinet that let's get this consultation going, let's get the findings, let's bring it to Cabinet, but then let's get on with it. We've really got to get this going. I think we've done all the talking we can do. There's a lot of broad agreement on this issue around this table and across the council, and we just really need to kind of knuckle down and get on with it now. So I wish it well, but let's get going.
Thank you. In any other overview and scrutiny, I think I would agree with you emphatically. However, in terms of getting this consultation out, it is going to be tricky with the current circumstances. I don't think anybody around the table actually knows really yet what that impact is going to be, or especially specifically with this at all.
Yeah. Subject to. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Maidman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm often sceptical around measures that are likely to disproportionately impact on our vulnerable members of society. But I did want to comment that what I'm really pleased to see in here is the coordinated approach, and that we're looking at bringing together a whole range of services, including mental health services, accommodation, and etc. So for me, that's really reassuring that this isn't being done in isolation. Councillor Farquhar asked something kind of similar to what I wanted to ask, but it was more about what's driven you to the conclusion around which numbers need to be where. Is it based on crime figures, etc., or is it something more arbitrary, I guess?
Yeah, so it's based on recorded incidents of antisocial behaviour and various other recorded incidents through lots of different organisations, so mainly the police, but also council officers. I'm trying to think, what was your first part of your question? Because I wrote...
It was around often being sceptical about things that are going to impact on those
because it was what you were saying about working in isolation versus working together. So it's really, really important that as many organisations that deal with similar problems or interconnected problems are working together. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
Chairman, my questions have been broadly answered, and in light of the time, I'll withdraw.
Any further comments? Councillor Mellor?
Thank you. A question, and apologies if I've missed something here, but the approaches in Poole and Bournemouth are different. We're adding CSAS officers in Poole, which I fully support. The report says effectively it starts to harmonise, our behaviour across. They're still different, aren't they? Because so how is adding CSAS officers in Poole? You've got a PSPO in Poole, and you've got the very different bullet points that can work in Bournemouth. So first question is, how does that harmonise it? It brings it closer. How does it harmonise it?
Well, so the antisocial behaviour officers in Poole that have been used in the PSPOs have just got a different method of working. Essentially, the two.
If you've still got the PSPO in Poole and a different PSPO.
Well, so there's two PSPOs in Poole plus the one in Bournemouth.
Yeah, but they're not. So effectively, it isn't harmonised by adding the.
Yeah, sure.
So there is the measures contained in the existing, or what we're consulting on, would remain in the PSPO in Poole. We have a similar PSPO in Bournemouth which covers those measures as well. So that would give that consistency of approach. We do have to consult on whether to renew those PSPOs across the board, across the whole of BCP, and that will happen later in the year. But we would have the same elements of PSPOs in Bournemouth Town Centre and in Poole Town Centre, and then the CSAS officers operating in the two areas as well.
And I'm catching up with this, so accept my apologies, but that effectively means the PSPO in Poole is being downgraded, watered down effectively. Because also then the report goes on to say there is evidence, and I think all these things should always be evidence-based, and there's evidence, and it's a very politically contentious thing to do at the time. It was a brave thing to do at the time in Poole, and there's an evidence base, as the report says, that it actually worked exactly what Councillor Maiden said, because it allowed lots of interventions and multi-interventions. So I'm just not comfortable with that being step back from, because there's an evidence base that it has worked. And we have a problem in Bournemouth that it doesn't, and it's getting worse. We've got something in Poole that's evidence based that does work, and you're watering it down rather than watering it up, and I'm uncomfortable with it.
So I don't disagree that the Poole PSPO has been shown to have an impact on antisocial behaviour figures, but the difference between the impact of the Poole PSPO and the CSAS officers that we've had in Bournemouth is quite drastic. So in between 2017 and 2018, we had CSAS officers implemented in Bournemouth, and we had the PSPO implemented in Poole. In Bournemouth, we've seen an 18% reduction in ASB incidents. In Poole, we've seen a 3% reduction in ASB incidents. So while you're correct that the Poole PSPO is functional and does reduce incidents, it's not as effective as the CSAS officers. Thank you.
But then, so you're saying that effectively the current ASB instance in Bournemouth, we're very happy with it, and it's effective. The point about the PSPO was it was targeting different things, in terms of whether people are allowed to leave, sleeping bags indoors. Just take a walk through Bournemouth Town Centre at the moment, and it isn't. I would challenge anybody to tell me what's happening in Bournemouth right now is effective. So regardless of what you're saying in terms of the percentages of ASB. They're targeting different things. What's happening in Poole was successful. It's been proven to be successful. What's happening in Bournemouth is not working. So I don't agree with you. I think you're watering it down. I think you're going the wrong way.
Any further comments from any other members? Okay. Councillor Farquhar, is this a new point?
It is.
Okay.
I won't steal your thunder. I'll just bring the board's attention back to the recommendations, because ultimately it goes out to public consultation. So it'll be the public that decides whether or not it's effective or not.
Okay. Thank you for that point. I wasn't actually going to say that. I was actually going to say that it's been an interesting discussion, and I think the board are supportive of this. But we want to really get going on this, because I choose my words carefully, because Mr. Wright is sitting at the back of the room. That there have been lots of reports saying that the situation is getting worse in Bournemouth Town Centre, in Poole and the bus station. We need to actually address this, and we need to address this ASAP. Obviously, you're saying that there's going to be the consultation, and am I right in saying that the consultation is to do with the PSPO in Poole and
That's
not
correct. So
with...
we can't alter
Right.
the PSPO without that consultation.
Okay, right. So that's with the PSPO. So we park that to one side. So I think the message from the board is that yes, we. Okay, I start again. It is 6 o'clock. I went by the clock on my laptop. So welcome everyone to the second Overview and Scrutiny meeting for today. So I will. Housekeeping. Yes, we do have to do housekeeping because we do have a member, at least, of the public here. If I could hand over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Please note that this Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the Council website in due course. Please could I remind members and officers to use their microphones when speaking. The meeting may also be audio recorded and or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. Finally, please could I ask that mobile phones be turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Bit remiss of me, it's just to say that the chairman, Councillor Broadhead, is not available, so I'm actually in the chair today. So hence I am making all these announcements. So we will carry on with the agenda. The next two items are apologies and substitute members. So if I hand that over to you as well, Claire. Thank you.
Yes, apologies for this meeting have been received from the Chairman, Councillor Philip Broadhead, Councillor Mike Green, Councillor Nicola Green and Councillor Pete Miles. We've also got possible apologies from Councillor Iyengar. Item 2 is substitute members. And we have received notification from the appropriate group leaders or their nominated representatives that Councillor Jackie Edwards is substituting for Councillor Nicola Green, Councillor Drew Mellor is substituting for Councillor Broadhead, and Councillor Sarah Anderson is substituting for Mike Green.
Thank you. Right, next item on the agenda, declarations of interest. So members, do any of you have any items that you need to... Yes, Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 7 on the financial investment strategy. It makes reference to St Stephen's Road and BDC, of which I am a board member.
Thank you for that. That is noted. Any other members have any interest they wish to declare? No? Well, if you find as we progress through the meeting you have, then could you please declare it at that point? And next item is public speaking. No public questions have been received within the deadline, or public statements or petitions. So we now move on to the next item, which is item 5, Chairman's Update. I note that we actually have several substitute members here today for the board. So welcome to those who are substituting today. And there's no such thing as a silly question. All contributions are very welcome in the course of the debate and discussion that will ensue. As I announced at the earlier meeting, we will actually take an urgent item of business, which is an update on the COVID-19 situation. I know some of you during the break had actually listened to the announcement from government, from the Prime Minister, so we will actually have an update at the end of this meeting. So what we want to do is provide sufficient time to actually have that discussion at the end, because it is very important that we understand the situation for the council, us as members, officers, and also potentially what the impact could be to service provision from the council. So while we're on that note, I know some of you, and I know that officers, the support officers have actually received messages to say, because we've been asked to avoid all social contact, can this meeting still progress? So if I can just hand this over at this point to the Chief Executive, just to say a few words on that matter before we carry on with the meeting. Chief Executive?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, so the formal position for the meeting is that we issued agenda papers and therefore the meeting is called and will go ahead so long as there is a quorum of members here. A quorum in this case comprising 5 or more. There are more than 5 members here, so the meeting can go ahead. In terms of the view from government, they've talked about stopping social contact. That does not include work-related contact. Yes, unnecessary travel is recommended to be reduced or ceased, but in my view, this is a working meeting and is something that you wouldn't count as social contact, and certainly I think you would count as essential travel in terms of the ongoing operation of the council. So I'm content that the meeting goes ahead. I have said to officers if they don't want to attend a particular meeting, they can either arrange for Skype or for substitutes or other people to cover it. I'm quite clear that if there's an issue that comes up and we don't have the appropriate officer here for whatever reason, then we'll either respond to you in writing after the meeting. Issues that are coming before the Cabinet for Wednesday, which is what you're examining, we will get you a response during tomorrow if there's a question that we can't answer because somebody's not here. So I'm happy the meeting goes ahead. I'm happy that the Council does everything to support that. We will, of course, be looking at the ongoing and changing guidance from government. We'll give an update later on, but we'll also pick that up over the next few days as they look to make some other changes.
Thank you very much, Chief Executive. So we'll carry on with the agenda as published. So we're now on to item 6, scrutiny of regeneration-related cabinet reports. And we only have one item listed under here, which is the Wessex Fields Site Development Strategy. 2, an Arts and Culture Development in Bournemouth. So I understand Councillor Howe's not available. So Councillor Hadley, are you taking both items? Just the first one. Okay, we will do the Wessex Field one. If I could hand that over to you to present, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the Wessex Field Development Strategy, we undertook consultation with the public, which was deferred because of the general election, but we had a good turnout for that to 3 sessions. And as an outcome of that, you can see in the report there are the areas that were supported by the members of the public and the areas that they didn't feel that they could support. And interestingly, the top area that they could support was also one of the ones that they didn't like, which was the transport theme. But very strongly, people supported the idea of healthcare and research and education as a theme, affordable and key worker housing, and realising the vision of the living laboratory, which was something that was shared with members of the public through a film that highlighted the opportunity of that. As I say, the transport theme was far more controversial, and actually was also the largest negative thing that people didn't want to see was access to Dean Road and Riverside Avenue. What we are anticipating coming to Cabinet for Wednesday is to now go forwards with looking at viable options to take the site forwards based on those key 3 themes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Members, I open it up for discussion, debate, clarification, questions. Yes, Councillor Farquhar.
No questions at this time, but I must say that I attended myself one of the events. I thought it was a great way to reach out to the public. It was well attended by those that live within the immediate area of Wessex Fields. A lot of old issues came up, but the officers supplied very good reasoning as regards the transition from one Wessex Field plan to another. But it was really refreshing to see the public being involved in looking at things in a different way, rather than the economy, but towards the environment and ecological issues, as well as ways which we may well wish to live, including sustainable living and key worker housing. And I was particularly grateful that the hospital representatives came along and described their plans for the Living Lab, and that was received with very well by the public.
Thank you for that. Any other members wish to speak? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I note the comment that Councillor Hadley mentioned about the roads, but if we're looking at key worker housing and access to the hospital, surely we're going to have to do something with roads. And if we're talking about sort of, I don't know, say 300 houses, there's got to be some fairly major infrastructure that's put in there as well to prevent total gridlock and providing access for the hospital and for the emergency services to these houses. So I'm just wondering what is going to happen with the actual access to, as Councillor Farquhar said, about social housing.
Absolutely. So that wasn't part of the consultation process. It was very much around the land use specifically. I think we have to look at that carefully, and it has to be part of the plan. We have already been talking with the hospital about access to their site, both for staff and also for if they want to bring ambulances in directly from the Wessex Way. So there's from the Spur Road rather. So it's part of the development we now need to go into.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Mellor and then Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. I was studying on the Scrutiny Committee when Councillor Howell presented the original, Wessexville paper and then talked about going on to the consultation. At that point, it was the strong message from Councillor Howell was that the transport scheme as historically laid out was very much something that the administration didn't want to proceed with. Where it's now come back in and under this consultation as the number one, how's it called, positive supported idea theme, the road and the transport theme. Could you just comment on whether your view or the administration's view has changed because of the positive feedback in the survey, and then secondly, where that is now the most positive outcome, what is your expectation of what will come forward? What brief will be in and around that theme? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if I draw your attention to Appendix 2, the graphs. So the fourth most popular was a road through and around Deansley Avenue, and the first most unpopular was a road around Deansley Riverside Avenue. So the population were not in support. Sorry, the people who came along to the presentation were not necessarily in support of that. There was a really interesting idea that came up from a member of the public about using the existing bridges of the Castle Lane flyover to effectively allow people to filter back round, and that's something that I think we do need to look at. We clearly need to look at sustainable transport to the whole area, and one of the opportunities that the TCF funding brings us is to look at a foot and cycle bridge across to St Catherine's to Christchurch to be able to get people into the back of the hospital in that way, and a really attractive route to encourage people to access by sustainable transport. Part of the problem really is that the real congested area is down by Ophir Bridge. It's the last bit of that road which isn't affected. So we're just channeling more people potentially into an already very congested road. So that's something we'd be really keen to avoid. So I don't think Cabinet's view has changed completely, but I think we've certainly been listening to some of the things that came through within the consultation and that balance. And I actually went to one of the consultations. I spent the whole time talking to people who are very agitated about it and in both directions. So it is a really balanced view.
Councillor Mellor, do you want to supplement? Yes.
Just briefly, yeah. I think agitated is the word. There's obviously huge feeling, on this in both sides of the argument, the way it's been presented from yourselves and also presented historically. I just underline that word agitated and the sensitivity around it. The two ward councillors have made a significant and representation about this. So. Although I absolutely understand the drive towards sustainable transport and the fact that foot and cycleway bridge, that's an addition. In my mind, the idea that is going to be sufficient to effectively add some value in that area is, I think, a bit slightly far-fetched. But we'll wait and see what comes, what comes back from it.
If I may just respond to that, yeah. I think certainly that's just one measure, and we have been talking very actively with our hospital as part of their redevelopment plans. They're going to need to constrict their car parking, so they are very keen to look at modal shift for their employees. We need to work with all the employers around that area. There's also other routes in that need to be improved, but that's one of a number of measures. Thank you.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. You highlighted the fact that there was a large percentage of people that did not support the road and transport scheme, 25% in fact, but actually 30% did support the theme. So there were actually more people in favour of the road transport theme than were against it. Also, the outcome of this consultation is presumably significantly different from the previous public consultation. Now, is this consultation or this paper now a result from the answer you're looking for from the consultation? And how does that stack up against the arguments that were presented in the first consultation? You know, in other words, you know, what are we to believe here? You know, 2 public consultations, different answers, different outcomes. So is this just not a question of making the consultation fit the answer that you're looking for?
I'm sorry, I wasn't involved in the first public consultation, so I don't know the detail of that one. I think this was originally there was the people responding to the planning consent for the flyover and the original road scheme. Is that the one you're referring to? Yes. Well, that again was a very contentious scheme, and it was for people particularly on the other side at Holdenhurst. That was a particular problem. We have to take what we find here, and we need now to work up a scheme that is going to be workable, accepting that we will need to make sure that people can get in by vehicle, can service the site, and all those sorts of things, but also take into account the climate emergency and our need to move people away from cars for short journeys. That's part of the journey that we're on.
Councillor Bartlett, do you want to supplement?
Just to go back on the first point I made about more people being in favour of the road and transport scheme, which you seem to want to disregard. You know, the emphasis seems to be on the number of people that rejected that. What's your explanation of that?
So there were a range of different measures here. The specific one, which is fourth, was the road to around Deansea Riverside Avenue, which was supported by 6% of people, and not supported by 12% of people. There are a number of elements of the transport, and we need to break that out, and we need to understand that in more detail. As I say, we've been talking to the hospital about a gated access for their staff to get directly from the spur road into site. We listened to the concept of having a pass around on the underpass of the flyover. We need to work out the detail. It wasn't part of the consultation. It wasn't presented to people as part of the consultation, which is part, I think, of the reason why their answers were scattered in terms of what they did or wouldn't support, because it wasn't structured perhaps by having a presentation from us on this is the transport scheme we expect to see. It was very much around the land use, and they responded with those top 3 themes. So we now need to work up how do we support that land use with the appropriate transport scheme. That will be part of that.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Forgive the probing, but actually I do support the recommendations that you put in this paper. No problem with it whatsoever. But I think the transport and is a really key issue that's linked directly to all of this, and it's important, obviously, that we get the right consensus and we do reflect the residents' views on it. So.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions, if that's okay. Sorry for this, but what is a living lab?
So this is a concept that's been come up from Bournemouth University, working with the hospital and with the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership. And it's really around this is outside my area of particular knowledge, but it's a bioengineering and bioscience support, and it's really around looking at health and social care development, and obviously as an area with a particularly growing elderly population, we need to find innovative ways to develop the research and support. So it's having something right next to the hospital that will enable us to do innovative research in the areas of health and social care, and be a focus for that.
Next question, yes.
I always think this word is bandied around, or 2 words. I mean, what is a key worker? And are you talking about housing just for hospital workers? Because there are other workers in that area who could consider themselves as being key workers. And how would you police something like that if you did say it's just for hospital workers?
So as I understand it, and I'm more familiar with Poole and the Parkinson House, which is the tower block at Poole, is available for key workers, and it's not just hospital staff. So I think it's about having places for rent that are affordable to bring people in who are key to keeping particularly the care economy going, but also young teachers and other public sector staff who can't afford to get onto the housing ladder. So in order to enable particularly the hospital to function, but actually also other public organisations, it's having accommodation rent that is available for them.
Councillor Farquhar?
Thank you very much, Chair. I did attend only one of the 3 sessions. As I said earlier, I was mightily impressed with the engagement with the public. There was some degree of legacy as regards the proposals that were put before over the flyover, etc., and this was cleared up. I think it's a bit misleading to the board to actually say, well, it's a toss-up between this percentage and that percentage, 6%, 4%, and so on and so forth. If we look at the charts as a whole, which I've just done, on page 11 and 12, you'll see that on page 12, which are the negative, unsupported ideas by the public, and these are fed back at this meeting, is that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 items which are actually related to transport or transport links. Whereas the positive side of things, you've only got 1, which is the road to Deansley, hospital parking and car parking, and transport hub and park and ride. So you've got 16 plays 4. So I think it's a bit misleading to the board from what I actually saw at the consultation. And I think at my session, I was the only ward councillor that was actually there. So it was a good engagement and it had a good feel. So I don't think it's right for this board to get the impression that based upon these charts and the feedback that came from the public that took the time to attend or actually feedback on the website, that 16 negatives relating to transport compared to 4, which in the case of transport hub and park and ride, I'd actually dismiss. So it's either 16 place 4 or 16 place 2. So I'd just like to highlight that to the board that on the transportation and road networks, etc., the message that's coming out of the consultation is what's not wanted. We don't want transport hubs into call centres. We don't want transport links into retail centres. We don't want office buildings. We don't want increased pollution. We don't want car parks. And I say we, these are the people, the members of the public that you're referring to that actually came and spoke and offered up their ideas. So I just wanted to make sure that the board didn't get the impression from these charts that we should focus on is either this road transport system or that one. It's not the feedback on the overall chart.
Thank you for that comment. Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. I think the 3 key themes are really well picked out from the consultation. The issue over the transport, as we, and I'm happy to support the recommendations, as the various options are examined and looking towards delivery, as Andy has said, the transport development is absolutely crucial and really needs to be taking place along with the development of the various themes. They need to be looked at and integrated together so that you are getting the most appropriate transport system that will serve that particular community and the activities that go on within it. And just one final point, it isn't always the case that the majority of people are right. I think the crucial thing is to show that what you have done is listened and evaluated all the options, all the comments that have been made, and you've come to a decision which actually produces the best possible solution.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brooke. Any other comments from any other members? No? Okay, so I'll just attempt to summarise, but before I do that, I do have one question of clarification, Councillor Hadley. Is my understanding is that when the land was originally purchased, that it was actually going to be designated as employment land. Is that a set thing, or was it just an arbitrary designation? I'm just thinking if it was designated as employment land, and the revision that is before us now is to say it's going to be a mixture of employment and housing, which is probably not a bad thing. Do we have to change any policies?
So again, this is probably more something Mark would directly answer, but we applied to the LEP for funding, and that included an increase in the employment, or employment on the land. In terms of the phase one, which is the money that we had, and then that was for I believe 500 jobs, and it was 2,000 jobs for the phase two, which we haven't got. Part of that is pathology laboratory. So council have already agreed on doing some work with the hospital around building a unified pathology laboratory for Dorset, which contributes towards that figure. So effectively, there will need to be employment in order to meet the terms of the LEP funding, but it's not the high level.
Okay, so I see Mr. Cotton's actually come up. So if I could just sort of add a little bit to Councillor Hadley's response, is to say, are we in any way breaking the terms of what we have agreed with the LEP? Is really my concern. Is the funding in any way going to be jeopardised because we've decided to go in a slightly different direction?
The short answer is no.
Okay, thank you for that. That helps with the timing of this item. Okay, so just to very quickly summarise, I think Councillor Hadley has actually acknowledged this, that while the consultation didn't actually talk about the transport scheme or the road scheme that would actually go with what is being proposed here, Councillor Brooke has put it very nicely by saying that actually, you know what, this is actually part and parcel of the whole entire scheme. This is one piece of the jigsaw. There's another bigger piece of the jigsaw, I think, which is how is it all going to come together? If you've got the housing and you've got the extra jobs with the health and healthcare, research, education, and the living lab, you have to have people coming and going from that area. So I think it is not very easy for the board to actually make any further comment, in as much as we've only seen one part of it. We haven't seen the other parts of it. And I think until we have the entire picture, fine, go ahead. Perhaps I think the consensus from the board is that they're broadly in support of what the recommendation is, with the caveat that we haven't actually seen how the transport scheme is actually going to fit in with this. So I think that it's not a recommendation as such, board members, but it's to say that are you content that that would be the comment that we would take to Cabinet on Wednesday? Yes? Okay, so if we can make a note of that would be the comment we would actually take to Cabinet, that yes, we broadly support this, but we are also having a question mark as to what the transport scheme will be that would actually then give us the entire picture. Okay, thank you, Councillor Hadley and Mr. Cotton. So our next item, I'm not quite sure who's actually going to be taking this, because I understand that the officer, Mr. Saunders, is not available. The arts and culture.
I think Bill's doing it.
Bill, are you going to do it? Thank you very much, Mr. Cotton. Okay, I'll hand it over to you to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As members all have seen through looking at the papers, one of the first things the new council did, BCP Council did, was to, as part of its policy agenda, was to embark on a cultural inquiry, which was basically a big piece of research which was funded by the Arts Council England and supported by our institutions like the Arts University, the LEP, BSO and various other cultural organisations. The whole point of that inquiry was to really think about how we can develop the culture and arts offer in the area and sort of embed it within the community strategy and the council's thinking and about taking the whole place forward. So that piece of work has been undertaken. There was a conference planned, I think, just for next week, which unfortunately we just had to postpone because we had over 250 people wanting to come along to discuss this. So we will postpone that conference and hold it in a few months, hopefully after the present crisis is out of the way. But that basically was a culmination of bringing everyone together to really examine the inquiry and take forward a strategy to start delivering it. As part of the budget setting that was happened a few weeks ago, the council approved a small increase in the arts cultural budget, I think around 150k, to get some additional officers to support that agenda. I think they also looked at what we're calling a standstill budget for the existing arts organisations that we regularly fund, like the BSO, Pavilion Dance, Lighthouse, etc. That's in the background of obviously immense pressure for cuts and savings, and I think that has been acknowledged by the Arts Council. That's a good gesture that we're actually protecting those budgets for the next year or two. That's probably about it for me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Cotton. Okay, members, questions, comments. Councillor Mellor.
Thank you, Bill. In light of, we understand the drive of this. We talked about this investment at full council around the budget setting. So there's obviously a difference of opinion on this. But in terms of the detail of what we're talking about here, and more specifically, the fact that you have just said the conference has been postponed, and we don't know how long that has been postponed for. Is this a good use to now then go and recruit somebody now, which is paper supports? Is that a good use of funds now in this situation? If this conference, for instance, wasn't able to be done for another 6 months, or would we be recruiting this role? So I guess my questions are around is this the right thing to be seeing now when we don't know how long this is going to be paused for? And I would question whether anybody would now tomorrow be going in, or Wednesday, start a recruitment process for this role when we don't know when they could start. We certainly, in any of our businesses, would not be looking at recruiting until we're sure of what's going to happen in the next 6 months.
I think it's fair to say that bring it back to the current public health crisis, as it were, that the council will be taking a review across all its operations, and that's whether that's recruitment freezes or whatever. We'll be discussing that over the next few days, and I think that these posts will be seen in that context. So there'll be a whole range of decisions that need to be taken about the council's budget and having funding to be able to support community services, and this will be something that will be taken to the round then.
Okay, Mr. Farron?
Just to add a little bit to that, I mean, I think what Bill hasn't said is when we say we're cancelling the conference, we're about to send out an email to cancel the conference, so it's all happening over the last 24 hours. So I think that's why there's a slightly hesitant response, because actually we've got to review all of this, and we'll pick that up at the end of the meeting as well.
Thank you for that further clarification. Councillor Mellor, you've made your points, yes? Okay, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. In paragraph 8 on page 3, I guess, of the report, where it talks about openly recruit an independent chair for the collective, I'm assuming that person is not going to be a volunteer. Is that correct? They're going to receive a salary.
That hasn't been decided yet. So that's something for the steering group, and that's the kind of thing that will be discussed at the conference. Is whether we want someone, whether we'd offer some sort of salary or some funding towards somebody or not. That hasn't been decided yet.
Okay.
Do you mind if I join the table, Chair?
Councillor Slade, did you want to respond to that?
I just felt that it's a bit unfair not to give a political response on that, and I'm quite happy to give a political response on that, as being part of the steering group with Bill and Mark. that we did have a discussion about this last week at the steering group, that there were options around whether that would be, the chair would be a paid person or a volunteer. There were pros and cons around both. We did talk about the fact that if it was somebody who was paid, that would obviously be coming out of the budget around the cultural collective, and that would be a decision for the executive board to make about whether they felt the added that there was any added value in having a paid chair or not, but that it was something that we expected to be discussed at the workshops at the forthcoming conference, which obviously, as the public aren't aware that it's been postponed yet, that email has not yet gone out.
Right. Okay.
So it is literally live.
Right. Chairman,
Is that helpful?
May continue. Yes, I mean, my concerns were that if it was going to be a paid position, exactly that it would be a reduction of the 150k that you have set aside. And I was then going to ask if you were going to be employing someone, and what you talked about is you talk about with a profile potentially beyond the BCP and reflecting key stakeholders' interest and funding potential. So I would assume that you would be looking for this person to be raising funds for the Arts and Culture Collective. And therefore, would it not be a useful idea to be looking at having some sort of profit sharing funding with them, so you had less of the 150k set aside for their salary and more where they had an incentive to increase funds?
So I think there's two issues there. There's one issue is around the arts and culture staff request, which comes within this budget, to expand and develop the cultural offer, and there is a role for that paid member of staff, that officer, to facilitate and support the board. That would be obviously officer level for the senior officers to work out. The chair of the board, there'll be an analysis done as far as, and there was talk about advertising in the Guardian and seeing whether there would be interest from a much wider group. So you might look at someone who has a very high national profile, who is highly unlikely to give their time for free, and a cost-benefit analysis to be done about whether there is a value in that. So that decision hasn't yet been made. Clearly, if there are ways we can make our money leverage, through other ideas around that, that's certainly something that we could take forward. But at this point, the paper isn't asking us for a decision on that. It's simply saying that we need to appoint we want to appoint an external chair. We don't feel that we were going to achieve much with appointing a member or local officer. The decision about how we take that forward would be jointly discussed with the Arts Council and other members of the board at their next meeting. We had convened a further meeting of the steering group, which was due to happen immediately after the cultural inquiry conference, so that we could look at the output from it before we took that further. Clearly that's on hold, but that's one of the areas we can look at. But I'm very happy to take forward the idea of potentially doing it differently.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have some concerns about how much of the 150k is going to be used on providing the officer support, but I think it's unfair for us to discuss in a public meeting salaries and staff of officers, so I will refrain from that.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Chair. Really welcome this report, and I really welcome the fact that the funding to provide for it was actually approved at the last full council. And what I'm mightily impressed with is the huge take-up for the conference, and it's such a shame that because circumstances have overtaken us that it's postponed, and the key word here is postponed, because it shows that there is an outcry for arts and culture in Bournemouth and Poole and in Christchurch and the BCP Convention, because you don't fill up a conference with that sort of numbers, right, just on, well, let's go along for tea and buns. I'd just like to say, as regards the considerations, and it is an operational matter, and I do take into account others that work in business, but also allowing operations to do what they need to do, is regarding the FTEs, pausing them, and what value that might have. I attended a community meeting on Thursday in a neighbouring ward, and a long-established events group, Friends of Fisherman Walk, which is in my ward, or neighbours or borders on one of the borders of my ward, are actually struggling at the moment to work their way through the nature of the temporary events notices, acquiring seal funds, etc. And one of the things which they're looking for is somebody to actually help put on cultural community events in the open spaces, in the community areas, but somebody to have a link with on the council, a dedicated point of contact whereby they can talk them through the mechanics of liability and filling out these appropriate forms, etc. So I'd just like that to be taken into consideration if we're thinking about pausing the FTEs, is that there may actually be a role for them rather than us going hitting the ground running and actually building up and reaching out into our community groups in advance of the end of the crisis for COVID-19, so that we're actually reaching out to these community groups and making those contacts and actually helping them take them through the actual processes of actually putting on these events, which all add to the culture. I myself, for instance, in another neighbouring ward, attended a well-being event. Now, you may not think that's culture and arts. However, it's certainly for the well-being of our residents, and that needed help in actually going through the morass of the paperwork and so on and so forth. So I'll just put a little appeal out before you press the pause button on not hiring an FTE, to consider that there may be another role for them in bringing us up to speed for when the crisis is actually over.
I think there was a question in there, Councillor Farquhar. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think certainly under the former Borough of Poole, we did actually have what was called a safety advisory group that advised on all the health and safety and so on and so forth. Now, whether what you're requesting for is actually within the scope of this particular item before us, I think I will let Councillor Slade answer that question.
Okay, I'm going to try and work through that. And bear in mind, I had no intention of speaking on this. I hadn't prepared because this is obviously Councillor Howell's area and he's unwell. So I'm feeling my way and I'm going from a little bit of memory. My understanding is that the members of staff that part of this £150,000 was going to pay for, one of the members of staff was around community development of arts and culture. So their specific role going forward at whatever point that we appoint, bearing in mind that with the fast moving situation, we may not appoint for 3 months. Therefore, this particular budget may not all get spent, but I think it's fair to say that we're going to have other issues with places like the Lighthouse needing more support because they're going to have to close. Therefore, to protect places like the Lighthouse, we have to think about whether they're going to be asking us for some help. So, I don't think it's about removing this funding. We've agreed £150,000 for additional arts and culture funding. That was proposed to be spent in this way. We will have to make decisions based on the circumstances. If we don't recruit for 3 months, then there might need to be some movement within that. The arts and culture in the community piece is absolutely vital. There is also part of this 150,000 was for small grants within the cultural envelope within community, so that will help. The safety advisory group sits within the tourism team, the tourism and events team, and they do work across the whole of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. They've now convened as a single unit, so where anybody is putting on an event that is licensed by the council on council land or requires assistance with running events, they are there to assist. I'm looking at Councillor Brooke to say assist in inverted commas. My understanding is that some of them are absolutely expert at organising events and are able to support inexperienced event organisers in what they need to do to make a safe event. So I would encourage anyone to approach the events team if they need assistance as and when events are started again.
Thank you very much, Chair. You did say at the start there's no question that you wouldn't allow.
That's fine, which is why I was just trying to work out if there was a question in there. Right, Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. It was just one point back around the going through this paper with community development and obviously the extra funds that were approved at full council. I was just wondering and looking forward to maybe as well, Chair, the committee as yourself on Wednesday taking it forward to Cabinet about models of success. So, for example, I recall at full council there was a discussion around our social behaviour and how certain outreach programmes in culture can offlay that, help that, take it down. And I would quite like to see that brought back after a 12-month period, for example, how that's helped, so how that money has gone in, how it's performed, and what we've got out. Have antisocial behaviour numbers gone down? Have they gone up? If they've gone down, why have they? Does it need more money if it's a success? If it's not a success, well, how are we going going forward? I think that'd be really beneficial because we have that extra funds, and I would definitely like to see that happening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
That's a really good point. And just to say that the delivery plans that we approved at Council, which have the very clear measures of success, at Cabinet in April, I think, I've just approved the paper for April. There is the framework around which all of those performance measures are going to be set. So I would expect to see all of the things that we've got in our delivery plans around not just this, but all of the things we're doing, a huge increase on the measures so that we can actually assess it. But I think it's completely reasonable that you ask for this to come back in a year's time. I also think because if you look at the MTFP and the 150,000 that was put in for this year, and then we've obviously pre-notified of intentions to spend in the following year, we wouldn't be looking to approve any additional spends in areas unless there was evidence that they had been good value for money.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I realise I do actually have an interest to declare, and that I'm a director of PH Live Enterprises, and they're mentioned in this report, so I think I should have mentioned it. I really welcome this paper, and to produce a cultural strategy and an implementation plan is absolutely wonderful news as far as I'm concerned, and I really support the paper. So nothing to add to that other than could I please ask that we have one of the metros that's been beautifully drawn in the report on page 39, because it's the answer to many of the connotations woes. Thank you.
Agreed. Right, thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Earle.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Councillor Fear said about metrics and how we measure the performance of this sort of strategy from the cultural inquiry, I think also what I've seen in lots of places is the struggle to engage real disadvantaged communities in arts and culture. And we know that addressing social inequality, economic inequality, to be able to reap the rewards of things like reducing antisocial behaviour means that it needs to be very inclusive. And it was good reading this. There was a lot about looking at equality measures, but maybe when it comes back again, just making sure that everyone is engaged, not just people who usually engage with these things as well. Thank you.
I make specific reference that at our steering group last week, we did have a conversation about it always being the usual suspects, and that actually I was very concerned that we didn't have all of the people you might expect on the boards and on the subgroups, and it was absolutely key that we reached way out, because I think there was a lot of people who find that even the terms arts and culture quite alienating, and it doesn't feel that it's inclusive to them. So I was very keen that as somebody who isn't particularly engaged in what I would describe as highbrow arts and culture myself. That it's really important that I sit on the steering group so that I'm somebody who goes, why is pantomime not as important as opera? Because it is, it discuss. But you know, so I am really keen to make sure that that we are doing the broad range of culture and that it isn't. It doesn't become an elitist thing, because I think if it does that, it's absolutely failed, and I certainly wouldn't support that. And you can quote me on that if you like.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I have to declare as well I'm a director of BH Live. I just wanted to ask about the role that the libraries play in the sort of cultural part of this, because are you seeing libraries play more and more a vital role in our communities, and that it's absolutely imperative to keep them all going for as long as possible, because they are helping social isolation and helping with children's activities, and I see that it could be part of the cultural sort of helping with the cultural parts as well, especially for maybe for local sort of parts where perhaps it would be more relevant for that area than it would perhaps be for the whole area, that it's relevant, as say, for particular areas. Sorry, a bit of a mess of that.
No, I think it's quite clear that basically you are asking whether libraries could be used as hubs to provide cultural related events or activities.
So I think our libraries are already brilliant cultural hubs in many cases. I've made no secret of my commitment to libraries and how important I think they are in developing as community hubs and serving much wider communities, because they are somewhere that most people feel safe to go in, that they might not attend in other areas. Libraries as venues, absolutely a part of this. Libraries as a cultural vehicle in a different way don't form part of this. However, one of the specific areas which was raised last week was the fact that the cultural inquiry talks a lot about physical culture, so through dance and theatre, and it talks a lot about art. It doesn't mention literature, and I'm very, very keen that literature is culture, and we have a huge literary tradition and legacy in this area with some brilliant connections. And we did talk with Elsbeth from the Lighthouse about the potential of could we look at some sort of literary festival going forward, which would enable our libraries to be brought really into the heart of it. And I would just add that we had our first BCP Junior Mastermind competition running throughout Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole between January and February, which was based around children's literature, and that is very much part of that journey of expanding that. So literature part of it, and libraries definitely part of it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from any other members? Councillor Brown, is it very quick?
It is very quick, yeah. Something that hopefully Councillor Howe might have picked up if he was here, and just help Councillor Peer and Councillor Earl in their sort of questions about how it fits in sort of delivering what we need to deliver from this investment. I just wanted to highlight in paragraph E in the recommendations, we've talked a bit about the £150,000 additional funding which was approved at Council, but for me one of the important things is that we're agreeing a 3-year standstill settlement for the main arts and heritage organisations in BCP that we currently fund. And that's detailed then in paragraphs 14, 15 and 17. And for me this is critical actually. I've had discussions with the head of finance at the Lighthouse that they used to get 1-year settlements from the council which were announced fairly late in the financial year, so it's very difficult for them to plan, and there'd often be a reduction of 5 or 10% in their funding. And we've said, right, we'll give you standstill funding for the next 3 years. So they now know for the next 3 years what funding, core funding they're getting from us. That helps them immensely in their financial planning and their events planning and their work with the Arts Council actually to sort of attract Arts Council funding. So for me, that's probably more important than the additional 150,000 we're putting in, because it really does stabilise those organisations. And paragraph 17 says, which hopefully helps answer the question, that consistent service level agreements will be arranged with those 6 organisations, making clear their expected contribution to the corporate strategy objectives that the council's grants enable. So that's going to tie them to service level agreements to say, right, what you're doing, what we're funding, what's that going to deliver in our corporate strategy? So that's where that sort of links in to make sure our funding actually produces what we need it to produce as a council. So I just wanted to add that because I hope Councillor Howell, if he was here, would be able to sort of elaborate that.
Okay, thank you for that. So, members, any further comments? No? Okay. So I'll just have a quick canter through. I think there were a couple of bits that I picked up, and in particular, it was to do with, because obviously of the fast-moving pace of everything that's going on, that now that we've had to postpone the conference, and that could potentially impact on the recruitment of officers and a chair, whether that be a paid or unpaid role. But I think what I was quite struck by was the point that the Councillor Slade made, which was that because institutions like the Lighthouse, for example, might have to close for a period of time, that could potentially impact the BSO, which is a very treasured asset for BCP, that any money that's not spent, rather than it being carried forward, that potentially consideration could be given to actually help support the Lighthouse and the BSO. And I quite like that point. But also, I think, for me, the other point that was raised was that part of the 150,000 is to provide small grants for various community groups to actually hold events. Great. But my concern with that point is obviously if these community groups are reliant on this funding, once the funding is no longer available, those events are likely to not continue. So therefore, I think if these funds were to be given, then therefore they need to be given on the understanding that they will, after a period of time, when there's no longer any funding, that they will actually continue to be able to put the events up because they can raise funds some other way, be it by sponsorship or other means. So that's a concern for me, that they may not be sustainable because they're relying on grant money from the council. And also I think we will, and this will be a recommendation, is that we would like to see a report back in 12 months to see how effective some of the strategies have been, as to whether, in particular, whether it has actually helped or there was any link with the events that have been put up in reducing antisocial behaviour, tackling antisocial behaviour, and how successful we have been in engaging with the harder to reach parts of our community, and getting them more involved with, as someone said, arts and culture. Sometimes it sounds like a bit of a kind of airy-fairy phrase that some people think, well, what's arts, what's culture? It's not for me. But the paper is very clear that it wants to involve everyone in the community. So I think those are the sorts of things that we would like to see in terms of the measure of success when the report comes back to this committee. So I think on that note, members, I think that the one recommendation would be that we want to see a report back in 12 months to include those items that members have raised, and I have summarised. We contend that that is what the recommendation would be, going to Cabinet on Wednesday. Agreed? Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Cotton, again. Right, okay, we carry on. Next item is agenda item 7. We only have support this, and yes, we would like this to really happen ASAP, because we want to give the public the confidence that we are actually hearing them, we are listening to them, and we're actually putting words into action, not just talking about it yet again. Just from me, from the chair, the PSPO in Poole, as Councillor Mello has said, yes, it was controversial at the time, but it actually did work, because I think we were, in the process of doing that, we were able to then house, I think 7 people then agreed to take housing when previously they just wouldn't. And we know that we can't force them to be housed unless there's been an assessment and that it would be a danger to their lives if they weren't housed. And that was the only time we could forcibly house them. But 7 people did actually agree, so it did work. But what I'm actually more concerned about is in amending the PSPO, as in paragraph 7, one of the things that will actually be removed is leaving unattended personal belongings such as bedding or bags, and then causing an obstruction in shop doorways or car park or public areas. Now, these are the 2 things that most people actually say is an issue for them, that they go into a town centre and they see belongings being left in a doorway unattended, and they feel unsafe. So I do have a concern, if those are removed, what would actually be put in place to actually deal with these issues. And obviously you've said begging, and another issue that was raised is obviously aggressive begging. So these are just comments that I think when the consultation happens, whenever that might be, I think those are the points that I would actually personally make. But I think in terms of any comments, I don't think there's any recommendation per se, because Councillor Farquhar has withdrawn his recommendation. It's just to say that I think the message from the board is, in terms of the CSAS, which is what this is all about, that we would like you to get on with it yesterday. Are we in agreement?
I agree.
Yes? Yes? Okay. Councillor Bartlett, you're looking a bit...
I have to say I agree entirely with Councillor Mellor on this, and I'm not sure that he's actually in agreement with the last part of the recommendation, because the aim is to remove those bits of that particular order that are actually the bits that everybody's complaining about. And so, why would we possibly want to agree that those should be removed?
Okay, that's a fair point. So
I'll propose that those parts are excluded. Reinstated.
Okay. Now there is a recommendation, which is that if I refer members to paragraph 7, the paper is saying that bullet points B, C, D, and E will be removed, but obviously they cannot be altered until we have carried out a public consultation. There is a proposal which has been duly seconded that bullet points D and E be reinstated. No comments? If there's... Hang on, okay, wait, one person at a time. Councillor Rigby, then Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. I think on that, the removal of those points B, C, D and E are perfectly fine. They're the 4 points in this which are actively targeting some of the most vulnerable people in our society. If you really want to get down to it, they can all be covered within item G, which is behaviour which causes harassment, alarm or distress, and that's what we're talking about here. You're saying people don't like going into town and seeing something in a doorway, or seeing it because it's causing them harm in a way, or it's causing them distress. If there is anything like aggressive begging, again, that can be targeted with behaviour causing harassment. So to actually remove these specific points which do just target people who are rough sleeping, not causing antisocial behaviour, just rough sleeping, I don't think that's acceptable, and we should be going out to consultation on the removal of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Councillor, I have seen your hand up, Councillor Addison, but I'll take comments from members first and then I'll come back to you. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much. I echo Councillor Rigby's points there. The judicial review is referred to. The judicial review is something which all councils will be looking at that have public space protection orders in place very, very carefully as regards its outcome. My understanding of the judicial review is if these points B through to E actually are targeting the most vulnerable in our society, e.g. rough sleeping and so on and so forth. And I wholeheartedly support Councillor Rigby's point whereby it is quite possible within a public space protection order to actually cover it under behaviour which causes harassment, alarm and distress. And to your point whereby it works to actually get people into housing, under point G, then that's the same thing. If people are actually conducting themselves in a way that actually causes harassment, alarm and distress, it is an opportunity to reach out to them, to get them in, because they are vulnerable. So I wouldn't support this not going out to public consultation, but I would suggest that it's very fairly reported as regards the nature of why it is that the public space protection order is adjusted, because it is identified in the judicial review that it may well be targeting the most vulnerable in our society. So I don't support the recommendation.
Thank you for your comment. Councillor Anderson, then Councillor Mellor, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Brooke, Councillor Bartlett, and then I will have to draw the debate to a close.
Thank you. Look, I completely understand what Councillor Rigby is saying and the emotion behind it. I actually do, and from an evidence-based point, and having been through this discussion in a very challenging environment, I do think this targets the most vulnerable people because we need to help them. And there's an evidence base that says this actually enabled us to interact with them in such a way that we help them. So, you know, if I can say anything in this, how the argument was portrayed the last time we had it was, you know, this group of people care about, you know, these vulnerable people, and this group of people just want to kick them out. It absolutely wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. It's heartfelt that I don't care what the politics and any of this are, I care what the evidence base is. And the evidence base says, by having that in, we're able to enact better standards, both in terms of, you know, public order, but more importantly for those vulnerable people. So rather than just playing gesture politics with what sounds right in a newspaper, this is actually what is an evidence base has worked. So, you know, I hear it, I get it. You know, we might disagree on it, and that's absolutely fine. But the point I'm making is this is entirely, from my perspective, arguing to support the most vulnerable people in society. We've just got a different way of going about it, and the way I'm going about it is evidence based.
Thank you, Chairman. There are councils that have done this and have found it works. And one of the things that they have done is they have allocated central storage places for people to store their belongings, so they aren't blocking up the streets, aren't blocking up pavements, they aren't blocking up stairwells. And it also means that where these people go to take their bedding, etc., the officers know that people are going there and they can approach them and target them there. So rather than going around the streets and tasting them. So I would totally agree with the comments from Councillor Bartlett and Councillor Mellor about making sure that we leave these two bits in.
Thank you for that comment. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Certainly when the original discussions took place on the PSPO Pools Centre, there was real concern over it targeting the rough sleepers, the homeless in particular. We were assured that it was actually being introduced after the wording had been changed, specifically to deal with professional beggars and get them removed. Now, if it has succeeded in doing that, I'm not 100% certain that it has, but as a consequence of what has been operated, it has provided some sort of additional accommodation, or additional homeless people have found accommodation. That certainly has got to be a good thing. But I think at the end of the day, the wording was such that it was very clear from the PSPO that it was focusing on the most vulnerable, irrespective of whether you said it was for professional beggars. And I think if that wording is there, then and it is going to be withdrawn because of that, I think it really does have to go out to public consultation over that, because it would be, I think it's wrong to keep the wording as it is, whether it needs to be changed rather than withdrawn, and that could be part of the consultation. But I cannot support the wording as it went out, staying in, irrespective of the evidence, because it clearly was targeting the homeless and rough sleepers.
Thank you for that. Okay, last speaker on this, Councillor Bartlett, as you proposed this.
Thank you, Chair. To remove those paragraphs and leave it under one umbrella, behaviour which causes harassment and alarm or distress, that's a very subjective statement which can be interpreted in lots of different ways by lots of different people. So it's not specific, and I'm not sure it could actually address the issues in the same way because of that. We have an obligation to our residents who are all complaining about these issues in the town centre, so we've got to take their views into account as well. Obviously, I have a deep-rooted appreciation of the issues as well in the town centre, and I would want us to obviously support those people as best we can. But we also have this responsibility to listen to the bid team, the managers, and all, saying about the effects on the town as well. So we need an answer somehow, and I actually think that by leaving it open, it will actually result in no change. I know that the chief executive recently went around the town. It was reported he went around the town with the chief constable. I'd be very interested to hear his view on this particular issue. Thank you.
Did you wish to comment, Chief Executive, or yes?
Not particularly, Chair. Thank you. I mean, I walked around the town centre to see Bournemouth town centre to see what it was like first thing in the morning. Paul, I think, has a different set of circumstances. I'm just sort of relying on the experts, to be honest, on the best solution.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, okay, time's moving on, members. We have got a proposal of a recommendation, which is paragraph 7 in the report.
I think it would be remaining paragraph 25.
Paragraph 25.
Because the recommendation refers to paragraph 25.
Okay, paragraph 25.
Yeah, this is where it talks about what's coming in.
So, right, so members, the proposal is that in paragraph 25, we are saying that the original PSPO, and we're talking about the one that is actually in Poole Town Centre, that we would remove clauses B to E. So what we're actually saying is we want to only remove paragraphs B and C. Yes? So D and E would remain, and that is what we would go out to consultation on, bearing in mind that it still needs to go out to consultation. Are we clear on that that is what we would like to recommend? Yes? Okay, so I will now put that to the vote. All those in favour of this recommendation, please indicate now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
All those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against.
Any abstentions? No. Okay. I think that is carried. So that is a recommendation that would go forward to Cabinet. I think that actually brings us...
Sorry.
Yes, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Farquhar has just requested for his vote to be recorded. I'm only saying this so that it's on the audio. Right, so I think that actually brings us, thank you very much, Councillor Allison and Mr Williams, brings us to the end of the formal agenda that we have for this meeting. And as I mentioned earlier, we actually do have, I'm just checking, yes, we do have an additional urgent item, which is basically to have an update on the impact of the coronavirus, the latest update. So for the board to actually seek assurance that the council's response to COVID-19 is appropriate, and for the board to act in its role as enabler of the voice and concerns of the public, to gather any particular concerns from councillors acting in their community role, and for these to be directed onward as appropriate. So we have Chief Executive, are you, or is the update coming from Councillor Slade and Councillor Dedman? And
so can I suggest this is Rachel Partridge, Deputy Director of Public Health for Dorset.
Welcome.
If I just give you a bit of a scene set of what's happened today.
Yes.
Rachel is obviously the professional expert in the room, but myself and the Chief Executive were on a call with MHCLG, the Department for Local Government, at lunchtime, with all of the chief execs and leaders of councils were invited to attend. We were updated on the issues surrounding local government, which I'll come on to in a moment. We then held one of our twice weekly CIMT meetings, which is the Critical Incident Management Team meetings, which happen on a Monday and Thursday, which Rachel joined us at. And whilst we were in that meeting, the Prime Minister made his announcements. Now, it's probably worth saying that Rachel had just briefed us on the stay-at-home procedures, and within 5 minutes we had to read out to her what they were now, because even the Directors of Public Health had not been pre-warned with what was going to happen. So the proposals that we were talking about as management team from 4 o'clock were unravelling as we progressed through the meeting. As a result, a further meeting has been convened for tomorrow, and these meetings will take place daily should they be necessary. So this is very, very much a moving situation. What we do know is that when the government made an announcement last week about the NHS being given whatever they needed, they also made it clear that that money was also available for social care. They recognised that that was the biggest issue for upper tier local authorities. They did announce, and this has been in the BBC today, that CQC inspections have been ceased, and Ofsted inspections will also not go ahead unless there is a specific reason for it. So all those standard things will be stopped. Tomorrow there will be some legal changes that allow for council meetings and committees to be varied, to allow for some remote engagement. We don't know what that legislation looks like yet, but we are expecting it tomorrow. But one thing that was clarified was that annual council requirement has been suspended. If we did not feel that an annual council was appropriate, we don't have to do that in May, which is a previous legal requirement. It was probably fair to say that a lot of the stuff that was talked about at 1 o'clock had been superseded by 4 o'clock. But there are significant things which I think are important around the ability for us to rebill our businesses that are eligible for the business rate cancellations. So we've got our finance team working on that so that we can protect as many businesses as we can. Clarifying the rules around the local hardship funds, which we've got, again, the finance team trying to figure out how we're going to work through that. We haven't yet been given all of the details around what the rules about that hardship fund are going to be, but the finance team will be working to make sure that we can make claims on that as best that we can. There are a number of subgroups around the various areas of concern, and the one area which we are going to be asked to get quite heavily involved with will be the community resilience. So many of you will have engaged over the weekend with the local groups that are popping up, where people are offering to do shopping and things like that. There are quite significant risks around some of these, because people could be handing over money for shopping that doesn't go anywhere, or letting people into their homes. So we were asked by government that as councils we should be trying to create that coordination and become the hub. We are expecting to meet within the next 24 hours to set up a steering group to take that forward. So what our ask is that whilst we're getting lots of requests in, what about this group, what about that group, actually we need to coordinate that stuff. But it is going to take us 24 to 48 hours to get that steering group set up, bearing in mind that all of those officers are already dealing with all the other critical incidents that this impacts the council. Non-essential travel obviously has been stopped. You will be seeing events obviously cancelled, and as Chief Exec said earlier on, this is considered work, so this is essential contact, but we will be assessing what council meetings are necessary and what council meetings can be cancelled, postponed, or done in a different way. That's pretty much the sort of overview. I'm going to hand over to Rachel for any sort of specific public health related bits, and then ask Chief Exec if he can fill in any bits that he feels are appropriate for this before we take gathering information. We obviously have Cabinet on Wednesday, so we're able to then hopefully do some feedback then. And there is also the Health and Wellbeing Board next Thursday, which is still due to go ahead, although it's probably going to be partially remote, so it might be possible people to Skype into it if we can make that happen. So if we can't get answers out, then I would like to think we can get them out for one or either of those meetings. Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Before you can bring you in, Rachel, I think perhaps it might be better if we let Rachel do her presentation, because a lot of questions are probably coming to all of us, that as the presentation goes on, she might actually address some of those issues that we ourselves are thinking of asking. So if we let her finish her presentation and then take questions, or does Chief Executive, what I'm just trying to sort of do this in the most efficient way.
Well, we're doing the three and then take.
Yes, so if we let the presentations all be put to us, and then if you write down any questions you have, then we'll take the questions after.
Just clarify, as far as presentations are concerned, this is very much notes taken from meetings as opposed to any form of presentation, because it is literally live stuff.
So in other words, it's just the information that you're going to be about to provide us.
Thank you, and thank you for that clarification. This is very much work in progress, hence some of you may have noticed that I was really busy trying to get up to speed with the announcements in Parliament and from the government this evening. What I was going to say before the briefing this evening was about the importance to understand the difference between the containment phase and the delay phase. There's been a lot of discussion about it within the media, but there's still some confusion, so we've worked really hard, supported admirably by comms, around getting the information out to members of the public and staff around the difference between containment, where there was very robust contact tracing and follow-up to positive case, through to this delay phase, which is very much reliant on a shift towards anybody with a symptom such as... It's very topical. I'm getting a lot of correspondence at the moment. So in terms...
Community engagement, that is.
Community engagement. So in terms of high temperature and or a new persistent continuous cough, people have been advised to stay at home for 7 days, and there was no need to self-isolate if you were in that family and had no symptoms. That, as of the announcement this evening, has changed. So within 4 minutes of presenting to CIMT this afternoon, my advice was out of date. So to be clear, the announcement this evening is that anybody showing those symptoms should self-isolate for 14 days. And really importantly, and something we need to consider in terms of impact on services and business continuity, is that so are their family members or close contacts that were in that household. So that's just something to note. Councillor Say's already mentioned the working from home where at all possible, and looking to limit unnecessary travel and going to large venues and going to events. That had already been discussed and started to be worked through, but hadn't realised it was going to come in so quickly. That can be really positive, and it's all already being factored into the business continuity plans of this local authority and also across the public services, about doing things differently and agilely and responding rapidly to a rapidly evolving situation. In a way, it's also giving us the impetus to do things innovatively and differently by remote working. So, it's challenging practices and thinking creatively. Also the difference in terms of changing from containment to delay, we're still being given the reported update of the numbers of cases within BCP as a footprint. So I get contacted by Public Health England directly to be updated around a positive case. That will probably cease, and probably has ceased as of now. unless it is of a specific area of interest, such as a case in a closed environment like a care home or a prison, for example. The latest figures that we have for BCP, to put it in context, there are some large numbers coming out in terms of the national figures. Locally, the published figures are 5 positive cases for the BCP area. And I know that all of those are linked to overseas travel. So it's to put it in context, that it was well documented in the speech by Matt Hancock and by the Prime Minister that London is ahead of us and ahead of most of the country in terms of the community transmission and the number of cases. However, that does not mean to say that it's not likely to develop here at all. But it's just putting that in perspective. Also, from the briefing today, to put it in context, it now looks like the UK is on about a 3-week lag from the position of Italy. So it shows, originally the modelling was about 4 weeks, so it just shows why there's been an acceleration and increase in the amount and the range of responses that have been announced this evening. Apologies, it's probably not my most eloquent and well-rehearsed update, but really does give a sense of the dynamic situation we're in. On a more positive note, I'm aware of really excellent planning going on across the range of public services, including partners across the Local Resilience Forum, NHS, local authorities, police, fire, all pulling together, including linking with the community and voluntary sector that Councillor Slade has already touched upon. So this is not a standing start. There's been a lot of really good work gone on to date and building on experience from flu planning, but it's definitely the sense of this is no longer, it can no longer be business as usual. We've got to do things radically differently and behave differently, and across the public services respond differently.
Thank you. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Joe. I'll try not to repeat any of those points and just try and fill in a few gaps, perhaps. I think in terms of overview and scrutiny board's role, it might be worth just re-emphasising where we are in terms of our emergency response and planning. So the strategic coordinating group has been set up by the Local Resilience Forum. Local Resilience Forum covers the whole of Dorset. The strategic coordinating group, comprising the chief execs of those organisations, stood up 2 weeks ago now and meets every Wednesday, so once a week. We then have a tactical group below that, which has been stood up as well. That's meeting this week. Locally, within BCP area, we've set up the critical incident management team, and that's the meeting that we had this morning. That was our second meeting of that. That comprises all of the service directors, corporate directors, plus key individuals. Public health are included in that as well, but also people like communications and HR to pick up any of those issues. So that's been stood up. That's working effectively. In terms of the UK position, that is changing very rapidly, and it doesn't matter when you hold the meeting, something changes in the meantime. So it's worth noting this is by far the most serious emergency incident that we've dealt with, certainly in the lifetime of most of those that are currently practising, I would say. In terms of scale, in terms of breadth, what we don't have in this incident is reliance on support from neighbouring authorities. You normally have a good support arrangements. So if something happens in an area, then you get complementary support from neighbouring areas. Everybody's facing this at the same time, so it is different. But the advice having changed today, we are responding to that, and we will issue some guidance. Key to this, I think, is identifying the correct role for councillors in terms of community liaison, in terms of taking forward messages with the community, providing that resilience and that assurance into the community about the services that we're providing, and also, of course, providing the governance structures for the council in terms of our services. So we are looking at which services we need to maintain, which are the critical services, which we can rein back on, which ones we could move people from delivering into in order to continue to provide the critical services. So all that planning that you would expect is going on. That includes reviewing our activities with funded groups like BH Live, the Lighthouse, etc., because we know that they're going to get financially severely impacted. Having said that, of course, we will also see a major impact, and I think it is worth saying that the budget which you as councillors agreed only 2 or 3 weeks ago, is going to change. It's going to change significantly. We're bringing a paper to the Cabinet as an urgent paper. It's not written yet, I haven't seen the draft, to look at some of the short-term budgetary implications. But also we know we've got to start reworking the budget for next year. Car parking income, for example, we're seeing that falling immediately. We will see less income through our seasonal activities. We're cancelling events which could have been profitable. So we're going to have to take all that into account. We're also spending on service areas that we didn't expect to spend. So we'll have to revisit the budget, and we will do that through an initial report. The report on Wednesday is not going to change the budget for next year. It's just going to identify how we're going to deal with this year, but then we need to pick up for next year. The issues around the whole of the town's conurbation in terms of high street, in terms of business support, we're working with government and we will continue to work with government. There is a hardship fund that's been set up. We need to make sure we get access to that. We're already standing up the team to reissue the business rates rebilling for those that have now got a discount off business rates. So we will do everything that we can in that, but there is a lot going on. We're working with social care providers. We're already finding some social care providers are not taking new cases in order to preserve the sanctity of the people they have. That's fine for that point, but it means that we then have a smaller market for us to be able to access, and therefore it's more difficult to get people out of hospitals when they need to be discharged, and therefore that will have a knock-on effect on hospitals. So we're looking at how we deal with all of those issues as well. It is worth saying, and I've said this to the corporate management team and reminded them and the directors, we have been training for emergency events for a long time. We have good systems in place, provided we stick to the systems, provided we manage it calmly and with purpose, then we will come through this in the best way we can. Our partnerships are very strong, and that is worth re-emphasising. I'm sure it will be stressful, I'm sure it will cause a major disruption, but we have some really good civil contingency arrangements in place, and I think the emergency planning is strong. What we have to have is confidence in our systems and our processes, and maintain that confidence throughout. So communication is key. You see the effects of, the run on toilet rolls is a bit bizarre given the symptoms of coronavirus and COVID-19 don't include generally a requirement for large volumes of toilet roll. However, we saw something happen in Australia that's picked up. Social media carries these messages. People then repeat behaviours, and we have to make sure that people are calm and have the best information that we can. It would have been really helpful if this hadn't happened during our first year as a new council, still bringing together 3 systems, 3 processes, etc. And that will require us to write to government and ask for some dispensation on some of those requirements that we have to put in place by certain timescales. So we'll pick that up as a council. I think the key thing for us now is to look at council governance arrangements and ensure that we put something appropriate in place for decision making and for scrutiny of those decisions. So we need to make sure we do that and involving councillors throughout. So there's a lot going on, slightly more than we'd forecast, and it is very, very fast paced, as you will have seen. We haven't yet seen major impacts in terms of losing staff through either self-isolation or through having symptoms. I think we will see that knocking on given the new government advice now. So we need to be ready for that. So there's a lot happening. We're taking it calmly, we're taking it as best we can within our stride, but there are a lot of changes and a lot of things that we need to pick up, and we are trying to do this while still running 3 different services on just about everything across the conurbation.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Councillor Dedman, would you like to make any additions?
Yes. Oh, hang on. Yes, thank you, Chairman. A couple of things I'd like to say. First of all the staff that can work from home are working from home, which is in our department, which is absolutely what we need. But obviously there are visits that have to be done, and those are being minimised where they can be safely. We had a meeting with Tricuro, which was scheduled. It wasn't put in specially, but that was really handy because I've got some notes from them about the resilience that they're putting into place. And one of the things I must say, one of the notes we made was that we're looking at the role we can play in the whole system, working most effectively to support the NHS wherever we can. So that really is one of our big plans, that we have to have the beds for people to come out. On On a note, I can't think, Vicky, did you say it about working in the community? One thing, I had a meeting with Jan, obviously, as well this afternoon. We were mentioning the community work, that people have got these websites up. And Jan mentioned that there will be people that we don't know about. And my feeling is, and I'm sure around the table lots of people will agree, actually councillors usually do know about them. We do know about people that are in need in our wards. So I'm very much hoping that we can carry that on. I think the leader said we need to be not in control of these groups, but certainly know who's doing what, and also bringing forward in our own wards and divisions people who might need help. And one of the things, I don't know how out of date this is now actually, it might be out of date already, but one of the things I had read earlier was that if you yourself are perfectly well, then there is no reason why you shouldn't help somebody with their shopping, but put it by the door. So I hope that's still current. So really, yes, I'd just like to stress that we cancelled 3 staff engagement meetings last week to work on this. So we're pretty much ahead of the curve, as they say, whatever that means. So yes, I'm pretty confident that it is going to be a big thing, but we're able to cope.
Okay, thank you. I guess now we will have a discussion, take questions. I know Councillor Anderson, you indicated first. I'm sure everyone else will have lots of questions to ask. So, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's really, you mentioned that we are now 3 weeks rather than 4 weeks behind Italy. Well, we know that Italy have got this sort of a high peak type curve. I'm just wondering if we are still aiming for the flattened curve, or has that gone by the way as well?
Shall I respond to that? That's exactly why the government have announced such sweeping measures this evening in terms of really vigorously stepping up the social distancing measures to try and address the trajectory that we're on in order to try and stop that. That's exactly what the circumstances are.
The other part of that question, Chairman, was, and I know it's very much a finger in the air, do we have any idea of sort of timescales? Sorry, are we talking about 6 weeks? Are we talking about 12 months? I think it'd be useful for people to know what sort of timescale we're talking about.
I will defer to the comments of the Chief Medical Officer. So there's been a lot of discussion around this. Is likely to be a 10 to 12 week peak. Yeah. But again, it will really depend on how successful the control measures that we put in place collectively and the collective work of society to try and reduce. Ideally, it would actually be to suppress the peak and spread it out longer so that the infection does not overwhelm the system or society all at the same time. So hence the notion, I've seen lots of nice graphics which I cannot take credit for, but in terms of flattening the peak, so spreading it out to allow it to become more manageable. I think we're working collectively on trying things that have good scientific basis, but make no mistake, it's a collective effort, and we're all, including the scientific officers, are basing this on on modelling and evidence-informed action, not hope.
We all heard that.
We're learning. It's a position where we're learning as we're going along, and the government is being advised by the finest minds. So, absolutely.
Okay, Chief Executive.
Thanks, Chair. Just to add very briefly that the President of the United States has made an announcement that he thought that the outbreak in the US is expected to last until July or August, or perhaps longer. That was a statement about half an hour or so ago. So that's the sort of timescale they're looking at within the US.
Right. Okay. Councillor Maidman.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, the biggest single issue that's coming up in my networks is around schools and the advice that schools are still staying open, yet we're also being told to socially distance, and a lot of concern coming out around how we can do both. And I guess, do you have any further information about how this is transmitted, why it is that that's still deemed safe and yet in other circumstances we're being told to distance? Because that's kind of a massive query that I'm hearing at the moment.
You won't be surprised to hear that I've heard that query a lot, and there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and the Department of Education is very much leading the response and support to schools in terms of instituting helplines. There's guidance that's been published again today specifically for the education sector. It's really important, and it's been well signalled that at the appropriate time schools will be enforced to close. Yeah. So it's not happening, it's just not yet. And it's about timing it absolutely accurately when circulation is more significant, that measure will come in. The reason why that's really important, and I get feedback in the multi-agency groups that I'm working in, it's really important that we support schools to feel empowered and well informed to continue that really important role, because when the schools close, the NHS and the care sector lose a vast chunk of their workforce, which is absolutely pivotal to the well-being and protecting the health and well-being of our residents. So it's really important. So it's not that a measure won't be taken, it's just timing it when that's absolutely necessary and trying looking at alternative ways to support the sector. We are in unprecedented times, but the really strong message is, unless absolutely necessary, it's important to keep and support schools to feel that they are able to inform parents and protect their pupils and staff.
Thanks. I just wanted to add a couple of things around schools, several things. The first thing is around the important role that some of our schools have in feeding our children. We shouldn't underestimate the fact that there are schools out there who provide the only hot meal to a significant portion of our children. So, if they are as safe at school, let's make sure they're fed and that they're not an additional problem for their parents who can't afford to potentially feed them if they're struggling. The second issue is around on the timing is around I know from personal experience that a lot of schools are doing a lot of preparation to create the space so that their children can learn from home, and they probably, like the council has needed a week to begin to build up these tactical groups. Schools equally have needed the space to create Google Classrooms and home working plans to make sure children can work from home if they have to go home. So there is something about that. The other thing I just wanted to raise was around children who are vulnerable and siblings of children who are vulnerable, or potentially children who have parents who are vulnerable. We are in the process of preparing a letter to ask head teachers to be sensitive around the issues of unauthorised absence from school. It is not, although any fine that a school puts out is administered by the council, it is not a council fine. It is the head teacher who decides whether a family will get a fine based upon a code of conduct which is administered through the council and following a period of consultation. So we have looked to see whether we have the ability to not take that action. There are parents who are coming to me and say, look, I've got a child with disabilities, my other children need to be off to protect that child, or got a mother with cancer or whatever. It's not in our gift to do that because it has to go through this period of consultation. But what we have agreed is I'm speaking to the corporate director for children's and also the portfolio holder to prepare a letter to schools to ask them to be sensitive and consider very carefully should they take that decision. Obviously, if schools do close early for Easter, it may not be relevant. Most schools in practice don't actually put that fine in place unless there's been 2 full weeks out of school. So if schools did close early at all, it probably wouldn't apply. But it's just worth saying, I've been asked lots of questions, why do we send the fines? The fine does come on a BCP letterhead, but it's not a fine from us, and I think that's really important to stress.
Thank you. Am I okay to just ask one
Very
more
quick, because I'm very conscious of the time, and I know that I've got other people that want to speak.
Thank you.
And just before we carry on, it's 8:45. Are members prepared to go on beyond 9 o'clock? Because we were hoping to finish at 9 o'clock.
Absolutely.
So we say we aim to finish in half an hour, if it is possible. Yes? Okay, so go ahead.
This was just looking about contingency planning for looked after children. Obviously, there's going to be quite a potential impact for looked after children, whether they're able to see parents at contact centres and retain that link. Is there any contingencies in place at the moment to look at how we will still enable that contact with parents in the event that people are being quarantined?
So, as I say, there are subgroups for everything. That's not one that I'm aware of, but I know that I can ask Judith and we can probably get a response on that later on this week.
Councillor Farquhar?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm so pleased to hear about the efforts of the Council to support the community start-up groups to actually help the community. I think that's the only way through this and spread the message. So all power to the speed of the steering group to actually put something on the website. I've just got a mechanical point. I've had people approach me to say that when they go to the BCP website for advice, even though it is there, it's not a banner headline. You have to scroll down. If we can technically change that so it is a banner headline, then that would help a lot of people that are concerned seeking advice from the council as regards what to do next.
We actually had that come up in our in both of our meetings today, and I know that comms were there and were specifically asked around doing that. So I think that's in train, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lawton?
Thank you, Rachel. Excellent presentation. My first reaction, should I adopt the Corporal Jones mode and, don't panic? But can I just say that I'm reassured by your excellent words and by the Chief Executive and by the leader in terms of that we're on top of it is the wrong word, but certainly being... thank you, Mrs. Devlin. Can I just ask you, Rachel, I understand exactly what the Chief Executive said about council meetings, etc., but could you give us some, I know we've read it in the paper and all the rest of it, but could you give us some further advice? How do we interact with work colleagues? And also, how do we interact with our loved ones in the present situation?
No, in all seriousness,
it did say sleep alone,
yes.
actually, on that website, yeah.
Aside from the alternative advice being given, I think the information given out this evening has really nuanced how we respond to that, and it's a really pertinent, timely question. It was very clear from the statement by government this evening that now there's a real recognition that we need to be living our lives in a different way, and avoiding unnecessary travel, avoiding unnecessary social environments, and there was specific mention of staying away from theatres or pubs or entertainment, which is quite a significant measure that's been advised. In terms of interaction, I think the council has already been and should continue to review how we do business and how we do things differently. We know that we have got very important services that we need to keep going for as long as possible. So in terms of support to staff to work differently, to work remotely, so there's not the danger of the virus being passed between teams of frontline social care workers, for example, that's absolutely being taken really seriously, and lots of pragmatic, flexible, rapidly evolving methods of communication, so telephone, Skype, for example. the guidance has also hinted on the thinking about those who are over 70 should be starting to think about what would they do if they are asked to self-isolate over a long period of time. That's not been called for yet, but it's being indicated that we should collectively be talking about it with our loved ones or with ourselves about how we manage that. So it is an evolving situation. What's really important and what is really great to see in all of this is that there has been such an outbreak of community goodwill and support, and I'm sure you guys are particularly on the front line hearing about well-meaning community members wanting to step up and do things to help, particularly those socially isolated or vulnerable who may not be able to go and get groceries, etc. So that's a really important dynamic that's evolving, and it's evolving rapidly. So, which is really positive. Obviously, it needs to be done in a safe way. So, not having 17 well-meaning people turning up on a vulnerable person's door and potentially overwhelming them with kindness. So, hence the coordination and the need for the group to help facilitate and support the most effective ways of doing that. And whilst uncharacteristically I'm comfortable with the microphone on, it's really important because you have such a good and important role within the local community. It's about pointing people to trusted sources. The amount of media attention and global interest in this disease and the spread of a pandemic, understandably, is causing a huge amount of anxiety, both within individuals and within communities. What we collectively and you in your roles can do is to really support people to access good quality, timely, trusted sources of information. And there's an awful lot of stuff on social media that absolutely isn't trusted sources, and all sorts of stories. The gov.uk website is the excellent resource, and it has a range of guidance for a whole range of sectors, including just guidance for the public as well, and also the nhs.uk/coronavirus website has all the medical related information about coronavirus written in a really easy and accessible way. So, you know, in amongst all of the noise around coronavirus, it's really important to signpost people to trusted sources. And it's a really good point about the banner, because it should be accessible as possible. And to reiterate that across the system, so NHS and local authorities, we're all pointing from our websites to the key trusted national information, particularly because it's updating so quickly. It makes no sense for us to try and keep our website with all of the list, but the link to the key websites which are updated rapidly. So that's certainly the message that I'm keen to share with you in terms of things that you could really do to help connect and support your communities.
I think Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on that point, there's a next door application which is used widely, and I've noticed already that it's growing exponentially in terms of I'm willing to help. People are actually registering their ailments and that they are going to need help, and I've been pointing people to the NHS side, but there's clearly the other side of it. The coordination of volunteers and the council's role and what they're trying, as Vicky has just mentioned, what should we be doing about communicating to those people what the council's role in this coordinating activity is going to be?
So this evening I put an update on the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole COVID-19 Community Resilience Group, the one that quite a lot of us are already on, just to say that things are developing really rapidly, that the council, has set up a group, that we are looking to try and find a way of coordinating this, but it is going to take us probably 48 hours before we're in a position to do that. I've had a number of charities who've private messaged me or emailed me and said, we can help, what can we do? So what I've tried to put on that main group, that there was individual ones, but they seem to have tried to attempt to merge them into a BCP one, which I think is sensible, is to just put that sort of holding message on and going, you know, it's going to, from what I've read, it's going to be a few days before things escalate further. I think as we can get something in place by the end of the week for the community, which is what we've said as a group, we're aiming to get that moved on to the next stage within the next 48 hours, then I've sort of committed to go back on there and just update. So what I sent out to members yesterday or the day before was a request for everyone to share on their Facebook pages the government advice. We have agreed a protocol that I will be sending out a members sort of update with every time I get an update that's going to come through me, so that we don't have to keep interfering with the officers who are trying to deal with their day job. So we try and feed that through and make sure that if there is updated advice that we should be sharing, that we can then share on with these community groups, that you've got sort of one place to get it. And equally, rather than everybody emailing lots of different officers with their great ideas, if we can feed them back up that way, I think it will ease the pressure on our officers, because they are spending 25% of their time now doing this. So all our questions about potholes and things, we need to try and just push them back a little bit and feed things through in a controlled way if we can, just while things are settling. And just on that, I think it is fair to just reiterate what the Chief Exec said, is the things that we plan to do, the things that we expected to do, the things that we've hoped to do in the next 3 to 6 months, I think we can pretty much say all of that goes on hold. Don't be surprised if the numbers are looking wonky in a few weeks' time. And my call is, let's not make political hay out of that, because actually this is unprecedented. As you know, yes, it absolutely needs to be scrutinised that things aren't being dealt with in a bad way. But actually, if we've got to put stuff off for 6 months, we've got to put stuff off for 6 months, and that has to come first. So I'm hoping that we can work as one team on that. It doesn't make sense to do it any other way, because it's just going to waste resource, isn't it?
Councillor Miller?
Thank you. Probably an opportune point to come in to say I endorse what you're saying there. You know, we've obviously got a job to do in supporting the process, but absolutely, you know, this is more important what we're doing. And on that, you know, for the four of you and your teams, just absolutely thank you for the work that you're doing and leading us through this. My question was on a business continuity point. Just trying to, you know, just get a sense of the scale. So how much? Are we aware of what percentage of staff we're expecting over this period of time to, you know, to have, you know, to be off with this in any way, and then, you know, is it after say 14 days and people, you know, most of the staff will come back into the situation, so staff will only be able to be out for a point. I'm just trying to get to a sense of the scale of business continuity issues.
I'll have a go at that one. In terms of the modelling around COVID-19 based on the data that we have available, so from data in China and also Italy and increasingly changing, it looks like 81% of the population is likely to get it over the course of this pandemic. And we have been told it's likely that it's around 20% of the workforce over a period of time that will be away, up to, as the reasonable worst case scenario planning. Obviously, that's modelled data and don't hold me to that, but that's a reasonable worst case scenario that we should be planning for, and it's really important that we bear that in mind when we're thinking about what services to work on, what services to prioritise. That's absolutely guiding the business continuity planning, so that has been taken into account.
Is it worth adding that specifically there's work going on as we speak around what skills do people have, what unmet unneeded skills. So for example, clearly refuse collection is not only a statutory service, but as I hope you know, we must make sure that is maintained, but we probably don't need to worry so much about cutting the grass in the parks. So if we've got people who have an HGV licence, you know, what do we need to do to make sure that those people are able to drive the service critical vehicles rather than the non-service critical? And we then have a role in, you know, perhaps modifying our residents about okay, that dog poo bin hasn't been completely, empty for a while, but hey, it's priorities. So there's a lot of work that's being done, led through HR, around what else can people do, what services can be stood down. Absolutely. Lucy's working really hard. She's already started modelling it. She's now starting to cross-reference everybody.
And building on that, sorry, just to add in, that's why it's really important that we are planning the business continuity around protecting small teams, or particularly vulnerable teams, and working differently. So a single team of very experienced, skilled practitioners don't all get infected at the same time. So hence the importance of working differently, allowing remote working. That's why the Prime Minister has signalled that that's the expectation. It's to try and even out when that's, when people get ill, essentially, because we're not going to be able to prevent everybody getting in. It's about trying to manage it so teams aren't all off in one go, and working differently to prevent that.
Okay, if no one else has any queries, I have a few, but I was just going to wait till everyone else has gone. Oh, no? Okay, so I think thank you to everyone for the information. I think for me the biggest thing is the community resilience, because I've already been approached by some of the residents in the ward that I represent to say, I would like to help, what can I do? So I think in terms of coming back to why we're here getting this update, I think it would be really useful if we could have just a crib sheet so that we can signpost people. So say, for example, someone wants to set up a small group within the Camphor Cliffs ward to say we will help people with shopping or anything else that they may need. But I said to them, oh, hang on, don't just set it up because this has to be coordinated, and I'll find out, and I've found out now. So I think it'd be really useful to have, even if it's just a crib sheet, to say contact so-and-so, or this is what you have to do, so that people will know what to do, and it is going to be done consistently, because then it'll all be properly coordinated, as opposed to lots of overlapping and then lots of people wanting to help, but then actually their efforts are being duplicated. We don't really want that. And then obviously the other thing as well is in terms of the comms to the public, but also equally as important, comms to our staff. I know, Leslie, you said that we are certainly in adult social care. A number of people are already working from home, but some, because of the nature of what they do, they're not able to do so. And I think it's equally important in all of this that the staff get regular updates as well, because particularly the ones that are in the front line, and they haven't got the option of actually being able to work from home. They will be worried for themselves, their families will be worried for them, and it's just the additional stress of the whole situation that, is not anyone's fault, but it's just a situation that we all seem to find ourselves in. So I think what I would personally like to say, and I think probably all councillors, would be a crib sheet so that we know when people ask us things, how we can adequately signpost them. Particularly, I'm very conscious of being on social media, particularly Twitter, all the stuff you see and you think, no, that's not right. So I retweet things that come up from the government, things that come up from public health, because they are the trusted sources. But there's just so much information overload out there that people tend to want to believe what they want to believe, and we need to try and actually steer them to actually know this is the official advice and this is what we're following. So I think if the plea from me is if we could, as all councillors, can have some sort of crib sheet to say for various things that are being set up, so people know. And I think it's a not knowing, and then people make it up, and I think that's where it then becomes dangerous and becomes fake news, which then sets alarms going unnecessarily.
I mean, we will do that wherever we can. The difficulty, I have to say, with things like crib sheets is it is changing so fast. Literally, we started our phone call this afternoon at 4:00. At the time, the advice was if you have a sore throat or fever, then, or dry recurring cough or fever, then you should stay at home. If you haven't, then not a problem. During the middle of that conversation, the government advice changed to, if you have a household member who has one of those, then you should stay at home for 14 days. And I would say to all members, and I think I will keep repeating this, that the NHS 111 website is the best place to get the most up-to-date information. And I think our job is to provide you with a crib sheet of places to refer people to. I don't think we're going to be able to provide you with a crib sheet of genuine information because it's changing so rapidly. And that's the problem that I think we're all facing, is just trying to get consistency because it is changing so rapidly.
And I think that in itself would help the link to the appropriate official websites, like NHS, public health, the government website, because obviously what we don't want is to say, well, so-and-so said this, so it must be true, because actually it might not be.
So just to give you an example of that, I have an associate who is convinced the reason that we haven't all gone into complete lockdown is because they've got a cure and they're going to tell us about it on Friday. So, and I've had to explain to her, I don't think that's the reason, but actually that's what she wants and needs to hear. And we've got to be really careful that we don't inadvertently spread those thoughts. I think what's been really reassuring is the number of councillors who've come back having sort of said at the weekend, it's okay not to come to council if you're in a high risk group. It's been really good to have those people come back and say, thank you, because I was really worried, because we do have quite a high proportion of our members who are either in a high risk group themselves or live with somebody in a high risk group. And I think that was welcomed. I think you're right in that we have got to give this community leadership, but my sort of pushback would be we don't want to give out the wrong information, and so it will take us a couple of days to convene this meeting, and once we've done that, and what I'll do is I'll send something out to all members so they know that's the plan, that by the end of the week we should have something. It will never be quick enough for some people because they want to do something today, but we've got to do it properly, otherwise we could make things worse. And the other thing around a number, we've already raised the possibility of, do we create a helpline, a recorded number, an email address? Because if we do that, we then set an expectation that somebody's going to be able to respond, and we absolutely can't put our professionals, our adult social care teams, our children's care teams in a situation where they're suddenly dealing with the mundane, everyday stuff when they need to focus on the people who they're already providing services to who are going to need them more. How can we do that in a safe way without creating a bigger monster? And so we need to be really careful that if we do set something like that up, that we've got the appropriate volunteers or community groups that can man those things, rather than putting a bigger burden on the teams that are already under pressure. So I would rather it took us, to the end of the week rather than have it done tomorrow and get it wrong. And I hope that that's a reasonable response.
No, that's fair enough, and I think it's all about doing the best thing given what we know, and obviously there's more to come. So given the current circumstances, if that's the time that's needed, it would be better to actually have, it's just a funny thing to say, the correct information given what we know, but giving you the time that's needed to actually get it as correct as is possible. And I think, we can't ask any more than that, really, because, like I say, we're all in this together, and we need to try and make the best of a terrible situation that we all find ourselves in, so that we can, in our roles as elected representatives, to try and help within the community.
And I think there's also the thing to remember, isn't there, that we're all just trying to do the right thing, and we might get it wrong and we might miss something. And, I think if it's done with the best intention and with the right governance, and it's done, properly, if mistakes happen and things could have been done better, then we just have to live and learn. But yeah, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride, isn't it? But I just think, we're in it together, and I think we've got a brilliant team who can help us get through it the best we can.
Okay, if there's no other comments, I'd just like to thank... Yes, Councillor Dedman.
Can I just echo really what everybody said, which is that it is going to be mutual aid all around the communities, and I think we're in the good position to help with that. And I think also been quite impressed by everybody around the table having the we're in it together attitude. I think that's exactly what we need. We need to do it properly, as the chairman has said, and we need to target our resources, but I think we can do that.
Thank you for that. So if there's no further comments, so just nearly coming up 9:10 now. I thank everyone for this rather bit of a marathon session. I'd like to thank everyone for turning up to give us an update on what is a rapidly changing situation. And obviously, as I said, we're all in this together. So if there are other councillors who might actually be able to help with this, then I guess the offer is kind of on the table to say if there is help needed, there is help available. So on that note, I will now close the meeting. Thank you everyone for attending. Safe journey home and keep your 1 metre distance.